Honourable Members, the Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? And I call the member for Curtin.
A few weeks ago, I met with Marian Hillam and Jan Ali Hadari. Marian is 80 years old and is a member of Grandmothers for Refugees. She's also active in the Uniting Church of Netherlands' group that supports refugees and asylum seekers. Jan is a Hazari Afghani refugee who's been staying with Marian for the past 6 years. Jan arrived in Australia by boat at the end of 2011. He's been recognised by the United Nations as a genuine refugee. Jan was initially granted a temporary protection visa in early 2017 and subsequently applied for a safe haven enterprise visa in 2020. Jan works hard as a tiler in Perth. He often works 7 days a week and pays all his required taxes. When he's not working, he studies English and volunteers with refugee support groups. Jan has a wife, Sadiqa, and 4 children, about the same age as my children, in Hazara town in Quetta, Pakistan. He has only seen them online in the 11 years it's taken for them to grow from toddlers to teenagers. They too are acknowledged as refugees, and there's an offer of sponsorship from the Netherlands Uniting Church. Jan is extremely distressed that he's been apart from his family for over 11 years. He's been living in an endless cycle of uncertainty with no way to plan for the future. He's one of 20,000 refugees on TPVs and Chevs who were excited about the change of government but are still waiting for a path to permanency. National advocates have told me that every day they're being contacted by people on TPVs and Chevs who are getting increasingly desperate. In the words of Behrouz Boochani, who spoke to a number of parliamentarians here this morning, "Hope is not enough, we need action." I told Jan and Marian that I would use my voice in the Parliament to advocate for refugees and asylum seekers in Australia. We need to provide a clear path to permanency for temporary visa holders, end offshore detention, end mandatory indefinite detention, and increase Australia's humanitarian caseload. In the meantime, I'm grateful to people in my electorate like Marian and the Grandmothers for Refugees who advocate and provide care for Jan and the many other refugees in Australia who are living in limbo. As a country, we can and must do better than this. We must show that we will be compassionate, give people a fair go, and embrace the international responsibilities that come with our extreme good fortune here in Australia.
I call the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Speaker. The Hunter has produced some outstanding sports people in the past, and it is important that we support the next crop of our local sporting talent. Unfortunately, succeeding in sport doesn't just take talent and determination. Parents also often have got to put their hands in their pockets to get their children to competitions. Local Sporting Champions program provides financial assistance to young people to compete, coach or umpire in their chosen sports. Sport is important in the development of young people. It teaches them lifelong skills like teamwork, keeps them fit and healthy, and allows them to excel in something they love and enjoy. I know firsthand how expensive your chosen sport can be, especially when you're competing on the state, national or international stage. These small grants make a lot of difference to the athletes and their parents. Speaker, I want to congratulate our recent local sporting champions. Benjamin Frost from Fassifern, from the Toronto Tigers Baseball Club, who competed in baseball at the Australian Youth Championships. Charlotte Tarleton from Dora Creek, from the Erina Hockey Club, who competed at the National Hockey Championships. Elise McLean from Balcolin and from the Hunter Ice Skating Club, who competed at the Australian Figure Skating Championships. Ben Jackson of Toronto, from the Macquarie Shores Swimming Club, who will compete at the 2023 Australian Age Swimming Championships in April. Julie Brummer from Fennell Bay and competes for the Central Coast Hockey Association, who competed at the Australian National Indoor Hockey Championships. Kiara Jackson of Muswellbrook, from the Newcastle Junior Darts Club, who competed at the Australian Junior Darts Championships. I just want to say 180. And Seth Charter-Smith of Barnsley from the Maitland Softball Club, who competed at the Australian National Softball Championships. Congratulations to all of these local sporting champions. Sport is at the very heart of our community, impacting on our culture, society and economy. Sport has the ability to improve health and well-being of all that participate, regardless of age, ability, background or gender. The benefits of sport go well beyond just health. You can't underestimate the positive impact sport has had on our culture, society and economy. Once again, our communities are strengthened when we come together to play sport, building a sense of belonging and feeding our national identity. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I call the member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to applaud the hard work of the sporting groups behind two major infrastructure projects set to benefit the people of the far south coast in my electorate of O'Connor. Albany Board Riders and the Great Southern Motorplex Group have spent 2 decades developing their Southern Ocean Surf Reef and Albany Motorsport Park projects. The surf reef will deliver a more consistent wave at Albany's Middleton Beach. Board riders, including Peter Bolt, Dave Beck and Tony Harrison, have spent years building a watertight business case for this project. And it's been great to work with the board riders, the City of Albany and particularly Councillor Greg Stocks, who's played an integral role. While Albany's 145-kilometre long municipality has wonderful surf beaches, there is no consistent surf break close to town. This hinders the growth of surfing and tourism on WA's scenic south coast. Hence, before the 2022 federal election, I announced a $5 million commitment to the surf reef. Thankfully, 2 weeks later, the Labor candidate matched that commitment. Today, 8 months after the election, the money's still yet to come through. I know that the Albany board riders are champing at the bit to build their reef, and I'm sure they'll get cracking the minute the Commonwealth opens its coffers. Now turning to the Albany Motorsport part. I'm thrilled that construction work of this much-needed facility commenced last week. Spearheading the project is a group of motorsport enthusiasts, including Theo Newhouse, Mark O'Keefe, Matt Pearce, John Braid, Jack Fuller and Robbie Sutton. That'd be Councillor Robbie Sutton. Albany has a long connection with motorsports, with the town reportedly the first to bring European motor racing to Australia. The distinctive Round the Houses event dates back to 1936, and as a kid in the 1970s, I fondly remember embracing the idea of a homegrown event similar to the Monaco Grand Prix. This race is still held annually on the hilly streets of Western Australia's oldest neighbourhoods, set against the backdrop of the majestic Princess Royal Harbour. Work has now started on a state-of-the-art motorplex on the outskirts of Albany. The 2.4-kilometre motocross circuit will be built as a priority, seeing as Albany's motocross community has not had a home for many years. This initial stage will also include a four-wheel drive training area. And down the track, the project's crowning glory, a 3.25-metre sealed race circuit is envisaged. This project is benefiting from $4.95 million from the Building Better Regions Fund that was axed by federal Labor. I can only hope that whatever funding alternative Labor comes up with is equitably and supports quality infrastructure projects for regional Australians. I close by congratulating everyone involved with the Southern Ocean Surf Reef and the Albany Motorsport Park project for their vision, hard work and persistence. My family and I look forward to enjoying these world-class facilities along with many other families from throughout the Great Southern. Thank you.
I call the member for Kingsford Smith.
Thanks, Speaker. On the 21st of January, I was proud to open the Indigigrow Native Bush Foods and Plant Nursery at Matraville Sports High School. Indigigrow is a thriving First Nations business established by Peter Cooley and Sarah Martin, specialising in native plants and bush tucker. And I've been proud to see it truly flourish in our community. They started out with 2 employees. They're now up to 7 apprentices, all of them Indigenous, and many of them have come through Matraville Sports High School into this business. They've also got 3 senior staff members providing meaningful and culturally safe employment for Indigenous people from the La Perouse community. They've developed 15 partnerships with local organisations and businesses, creating more opportunities to grow jobs and provide work experience for school students and apprenticeships for Aboriginal youth. The project is dedicated to the propagation, growth and revival of Australia's native plants and bush food, particularly species from the critically endangered eastern suburbs Banksia scrub, with a view to caring for country with respect by cultivating endangered native varieties. It's been a pleasure to support the growth of Indigigrow through funding from a number of Commonwealth programs, including a grant for just under $500,000 through the Strong and Resilient Communities program in 2019, and ongoing support through the Kingsford Smith Stronger Communities grants and volunteer grants programs. The opening of the new wholesale trade nursery and online shop is a significant achievement. Indigigrow's mission is to empower, to educate and engage Indigenous youth in culture and connection to country, and to teach them how to care for country, helping them to make positive choices about their future. They facilitate volunteering and education sessions for corporates, garden clubs, schools and other groups, as well as educating the broader community about the benefits of growing locally endangered plant species and how people can help restore eastern suburbs Banksia scrub by nurturing native plants in their gardens and yards. I want to thank First Hand Solutions and their team, particularly Pete and Sarah, for this project. It comes on top of the black markets that they run at Bear Island on a regular basis. It's a very successful endeavour. They've been in operation for 10 years and they're working to build resilient Indigenous communities and businesses and help promote culture, employment and economic development. I'm very proud to be associated with them.
I call the member for Wright.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I rise to give thanks to 3 unsung women of Tamborine Mountain in my electorate of Wright. Each of these women go about their business very quietly, without wanting to seek accolade or fanfare, making our special Tamborine community a better place to live, and it's right that today we acknowledge their contributions in this place. In no particular order, I'd like to acknowledge Muriel Shepherd, who's dedicated much of her life to preserving and promoting the rich cultural heritage and history of Tamborine Mountain and its surrounding areas through the Tamborine Mountain Historical Society. Muriel, who has served as the Society in a number of capacities, is always working to help educate the community about the area's beautiful history, preserving important artefacts and documents, and promoting a deeper understanding and appreciation of the mountain's unique character. Muriel, thank you for what you do in preserving our rich local heritage. And of course there's Denise Drysdale from the Manor. She's the co-owner of a resort and restaurant function centre on the mountain. The Manor offers guest accommodation in a unique country Victorian-style suites, fine dining, which would be expected of any country manor. Always providing fine service with a smile, Denise works tirelessly to make visitors on the mountain feel at home. She showcases the beauty of the scenic rim and its unique attractions, particularly in Tamborine Mountain, for the very thousands of guests that go through her property each year. And finally, Anita Stour of the Polish Place. Her and her husband opened the Polish Place some 40 years ago, and it quickly became one of Tamborine's most premier locations for accommodation, dining and the taste of all things Polish. Regretfully, in 2016, the Polish Place tragically burnt to the ground. In early 2017, I visited there with Anna and Phil, plus the Ambassador of the Republic of Poland, along with a message from the then Prime Minister of the nation. To stand there and proudly see Anna's resilience in the face of adversity, but also a determination and persistence to rebuild, is awe-inspiring and worthy of note. Such is Anna's determination, along with a healthy dose of the community support from the mountain. In 2020, this iconic Queensland guesthouse reopened to much fanfare and has since been welcomed by many more guests and many more diners to experience this real-life phoenix story rising from the ashes. The stories of Muriel, Denise, Anna all exemplify exactly what the mountain's about: kindness, beauty, a wonderful place to visit, its rich sense of history, its resilience and its enormous community spirit. Come to Tamborine Mountain and see the women that contribute to such a beautiful location in Australia.
I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Mountains has mourned this January with the deaths of 3 active community members. Wayne Levy from Katoomba was one of the most energetic campaigners I know. He was committed to many progressive causes and an enormous part of my campaign last year in the Upper Blue Mountains. Artist and Mount Victoria local Murray Morris is also being remembered. The Mountains had been her home for decades, and she initiated the very successful Springwood Art Show at Springwood High. And Hank Luff, who I first met at 2SER-FM in the 1980s when he was reviewing motorbikes, was an active and engaged member of the Valley Heights Railway Museum. All 3 made significant contributions to the community in their own way, drawing on their talents and their skills. They'll be very much missed, and my sympathies go to their grieving families and friends. Deputy Speaker, in the Hawkesbury, the extended Watson family is dealing with the loss of their beloved dad, husband, granddad and great-granddad Alan. Married to Darrig Elder, Auntie Edna Watson, I've known Uncle Alan for about a decade, but it was a privilege to hear much more about his earlier life at his funeral. It was a celebration of a life well lived, with some hard work and stories of how he never gave up and was always there for his friends, a bit of mischief and quite a bit of humour, but no one was ready to let him go. The last time I was with Uncle Alan was Sorry Day last year in Windsor, where he was presented with an award to mark his and Auntie Edna's decades of community contribution, and it was an honour to recognise their work at that time. Rest in peace, Uncle Alan. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the Macquarie citizens who were recognised in the honours list last month. Blue Mountains resident and unstoppable force, Jennifer Scott, is now a member of the Order of Australia for her significant service to the community through a range of organisations. As Jennifer said, she was going to contribute to her community with or without a medal, but I think we're all delighted that her Rotary work as a member of Central Blue and internationally, plus her contribution as the former chair of Varuna, the National Writers' Centre, has been recognised in this way. Squadron Leader Del Gaudry adds a conspicuous service cross to her medals for outstanding achievement in the implementation of the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, and for her work supporting the welfare and mental wellbeing of RAF members. Also a volunteer firefighter, I'm in awe of Del's determination to support women in the ADF. And Corporal George Wallace was also awarded the CSC for his outstanding achievements as an avionics technician, supporting the C-130J Super Hercs, the much-loved aircraft operating out of Richmond. Congratulations all.
I call the member for Nichols.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Pardon me, member for Nichols. A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. And I call the member for Nichols.
Thanks very much, Deputy Speaker. Look, 2020 year was a very difficult year in my electorate. We had a huge rain bomb that caused a very difficult flood event. And that caused widespread damage across farmland, dairy, broadacre, but also horticulture. And we're only just recovering from all of that at the moment. I mean, the good news is that it's filled the catchments, but there's been a lot of damage. And the year didn't end well at all for horticulture. There was a summer hailstorm. There was one on Melbourne Cup Day, which sent down a lot of what we call rice hail, and I'll talk about that. But then there was a devastating hailstorm just before Christmas, which just concentrated on the Tatura and Ardmona areas and Bunbartha areas, very wonderful fruit-producing regions. And the hailstones were so big that they smashed the side out of the growing pears and apples, and it has caused devastation for orchardists and some real difficulties for the economic drivers of my region. Now, I know how much everybody loves Australian fruit, and those opposite enjoyed some of the apples and pears I dropped off to the government party room before Christmas, and I did the same in the joint party room. The opposition, we love our Australian fruit, our apples and pears. Our growers love to produce that fruit, healthy food for Australians, but they have been smashed by this hailstorm. Now, what can we do about this? Well, I think supermarkets and consumers have a role to play, Deputy Speaker, in that there is some fruit that, whilst it has some small damage, it is still tastes great. It might look a bit different, and I'm hoping the supermarkets work with their customers and explain what has happened with this hailstorm, and the growers can still get some marketable fruit onto the shelves, and everybody understands what has happened. I like to say kissed by nature, some of this fruit, but it's still great stuff. And the other thing is the previous coalition government started a great program called the Horticultural Netting Program. Now, it was established to assist horticultural primary producers to increase their resilience by exposure to crop damage through the purchase of an installation of netting. So you put the nets over the top of the orchards. Growers were eligible for up to 50% of the cost to purchase and to have a third party install new permanent netting up to a maximum of $100,000. Now, my understanding, and I've spoken to the Minister for Agriculture, is there is some unspent money, but I have written to him and urged him to expand this program so that the people who produce that wonderful fruit in Australia can get access, particularly in this time of financial difficulty for them, access to some government subsidies to help net their orchards and make them more resilient against the effects of future weather events. Thank you.
I call the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Last week I welcomed Minister for Industry, Science and Technology Ed Husic to Energy Renaissance in my electorate of Paterson. Energy Renaissance is committed to creating and making an all-Australian lithium-ion battery, from cells to complete battery solutions, to help accelerate Australia's transition to a clean energy superpower. Now, for many years, the Hunter has been the backbone of the Australian energy sector, and our coal has been the backbone of that energy. As we deliver climate and energy transformation, the Albanese government is turbocharging opportunities for local businesses like Energy Renaissance to be at the frontier of the changing energy landscape in Australia. I was delighted to join the Minister in officially launching the consultation round for the country's first national battery strategy. We've never had a strategy before, and now we do. And it's going to be integral to helping Australia transition to a decarbonised economy, to deliver on our emissions target, faster Australian innovation and support Australian industry. Our strategy will ensure industry has the confidence to deliver and ensure large-scale uptake and manufacture of batteries that will be vital to transitioning us towards net zero. New battery capacity will help support grid-scale capacity, power our homes and electrify our transport sector. We know our success relies on companies like Energy Renaissance. Our shared goal is only achievable with the ingenuity of Australian businesses like theirs. Australia's unique domestic access to critical minerals provides substantive opportunities to manufacture lithium-ion batteries and presents us with opportunities to export this technology to the world. And I just want to commend the co-founders, CEO Brian Craighead, Sue McCluskey and Julie Fricken. Thank you so much for having the foresight. And as Brian said in his fabulous Irish accent to us all the other day, you know, it's a little bit like wool. We send the wool to Italy and then we buy the jumpers back. Well, we want to be able to mine and refine our own lithium, and that's what we're working towards in the Hunter with things like the Australian battery strategy. Energy Renaissance is one of the many companies in my electorate who are working towards net zero, working towards keeping the lights on and providing good, well-paying jobs. Thank you.
The member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And we woke last month to a couple of local businesses sadly being destroyed by fire. And these two successful businesses, Struddy's Clothing Factory and the neighbouring SJJ Creative Dance and Acting Studio, were burnt down in a fire that the causes are yet to be determined. So intense was the blaze that the building itself was so damaged that demolition was required to commence later that afternoon. Struddy's was the most impacted by the fire, losing their entire factory. And for those who follow rugby league, they would know the name Ross Strudwick, who is a local legend and has contributed enormously to the field of football over many years. As a former player and coach, Ross played for St George and Fortitude Valley and represented his country and state throughout the 70s. Following his playing career, Ross coached teams in Queensland and the UK, and in 1975 Ross founded Struddy's, which has proudly manufactured Australian-made products since its inception. Struddy's produce a range of sportswear, schoolwear and corporate gear for local clubs, schools and businesses. And in the aftermath of the blaze, I reached out to Ross, and I'm pleased to say that our local community has come out in support of Struddy's following the devastating fire. Imaging Solutions, another fantastic local Logan business manufacturing high-tech medical imaging and diagnostic equipment and personal radiation protection, took the opportunity to reach out to Struddy's and offer them some spare factory space that they had as they're moving to new, bigger premises. Their CEO, Glenn Honey, provided Ross and the Struddy's team with this spare space for them to recommence their operations within a week of the fire. I'm pleased to say that they're now back operational and meeting the orders that they have leading into the new footy season, both for the clubs and schools. SJJ Creative Dance and Acting Studio was also heavily impacted by the fire and have equally received a wonderful response. Founder Sarah Jane Jones started the studio in 2014, and in almost 10 years of operation, SJJ has provided a variety of dance and performance classes ranging from beginner to advanced for so many of the local young dancers in our community. They have successfully moved into a business next door to recommence their operations. And in addition to the great work they do with our local dancers, they've also done work at Warner Brothers Movie World on the Gold Coast and a range of festivals and sporting events across Logan and Queensland. Both Ross and Sarah are greatly appreciative of the great community support, and despite the tragedy, it shows what a wonderful community we live in Logan, and I want to thank everybody involved in helping these two businesses get back on their feet as quickly as possible.
The member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome back students and teachers for the new school year. The return to normal in 2022 saw schools last year holding award ceremonies, multicultural events, taking excursions, sporting events and opening new buildings. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the principals, staff and parents who made these ceremonies such special occasions for the students, but also for inviting me to attend. It's always a joy to see the excitement of the children when they get an award, but it's especially fun to see their parents and the faces on their parents when the hard work is rewarded. Best wishes to the teachers and principals who've moved and retired at the end of last year. Your work with our students was very much appreciated. You may not know the difference you've made, but you certainly will have. Special shout out to David Martin, who was at Lanier Public School as principal for 12 years. Best wishes on your new appointment. I know our Lanier community will miss you very much. And congratulations to the Year 12 cohort of 2022. The excellent results so many of you received will set you up for the next challenges in life, whether they be university, TAFE, working or taking a gap year. I was pleased also to visit the newly opened school in the Werriwa electorate last week. Edmondson Park Public School opened to the relief of many parents as they can now walk their children to school instead of having driving their children to school over 5 kilometres away. Whilst there's still some final touches and construction going on at the school, it will be home to 700 students, with 200 kindergarten students starting tomorrow. Good luck to parents and the teachers. I wish the new students, the teacher and principal, all the best for the new year. It is certainly special to be the first at a new school. The incorporation of the Indigenous languages to the new uniform and to the class names is a great innovation. The Albanese government recognises that more support is needed in schools and for students, so is delivering $203 million to support student mental health and wellbeing, as well as $270 million to improve school facilities across Australia. It's also incentivising more people to join the teaching profession. I've spoken before in this place about the need for more schools like the new Edmondson Park School in our part of Sydney. With so many people moving to the growth areas, I'm pleased that New South Wales Labor has committed to building new high schools in Austral and Leppington to meet the need of the students and families moving into the area. New South Wales Labor has a bold plan to address the chronic underfunding of our public education in Werriwa, and our community deserves the best. And good luck to everybody starting school this year.
In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. I call the clerk.
Government business order of the day, private health insurance legislation amendment, medical device and human tissue product list and cost recovery bill 2022, resumption of debate on the second reading.
Before the debate is resumed on this bill, I advise the Federation Chamber that in the House it had been agreed that a general debate be allowed covering this bill, the Private Health Insurance Prosthesis Application and Listing Fees Amendment Cost Recovery Bill 2022 and the Private Health Insurance National Joint Replacement Register Levy Amendment Consequential Amendments Bill 2022. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. This package of three bills is one that is really important. It is a way of modernising and improving how patients who have private health insurance can access implantable devices, treatments of things such as fractured hips, cardiac abnormalities, cardiac valve replacements, and a whole range of prostheses. It's very important because Australia has an almost unique health system that is one of the best, if not the best, in the world. It's being assailed at the moment, of course, by the cost pressures, not just of the pandemic, but of increasing medical costs around the world, increasing age, which of course puts further pressure on our health systems, and of course the pandemic by itself changed healthcare in Australia dramatically. It's also been quite apparent, and there's been lots of publicity recently about access to primary care and the effects that the Coalition's 10-year freeze on GP rebates has on not just access to GPs now, but on recruitment of our medical students into the GP training schemes, which has been absolutely decimated by the Coalition's policies. People don't like to hear about the effects of governments past, but this has really had a dramatic effect on our healthcare system. It's put enormous pressure on health systems to be able to provide services. And our government, the Albanese Labor government, is in the process of trying to repair the neglect and the damage that has been caused by 10 years of very poor coalition oversight of the health portfolio. I've grown up, of course, in the health system, and you know, it's a bit scary to think that I have now been a member of the AMA for over 50 years, and I started my private practice in Campbelltown and Camden in the same week that Medicare started 39 years ago. So it is a bit scary to think of those figures. I still see myself as a young boy with a dream, but that's probably not how others see me. But this is a very important bill, and I must commend all the stakeholders for coming together and agreeing that this bill is necessary and appropriate, and working in a way that will help our health system in the future deal with all the many challenges of the health system. It's a complex issue. And I must admit, as a practising doctor, I did often find it difficult to be able to explain why the cost of, for example, hip replacements is so much different in the public system versus the private system, and why different devices seem to cost more money here than overseas, and in some cases, I must say, vice versa. Just as an example, the hip replacement, joint replacement available now in Australia for some people can cost more than $4,000, and similar devices in countries like the United Kingdom and New Zealand in the private system cost less than $2,000. So there are differences in costs, and this bill is an attempt to try and make costing more transparent and more available to Australians at a cost similar to that overseas. The Medical Technology Association of Australia has agreed to work very collaboratively with the government in getting what we would call fit-for-purpose reform in this area, and I commend them for that. And they certainly have really worked very hard with their members to make sure that Australians are getting, in both the public and the private system, devices at the most appropriate cost. There will still be some cost differences between the public and private system. The public system is able to order in bulk and is able to have much more simple supply chains, whereas private hospitals private insurance tends to work in smaller numbers and have a wider variety of ordering capacities and supply chain capacities. These bills will attempt to simplify some of that, and there will be cost savings in that for both the private health insurance industry and also for the government. I would also say, though, that it is important to understand the importance of maintaining a private health insurance industry. In the health industry, we know that chronic and complex illness tends to be better managed in the public hospital system because of time constraints, cost constraints, availability of a variety of different services, and other social impacts that often chronic disease does inflict upon sufferers. So the public hospital system will always be needed to deal with the chronic and complex illness, particularly in multi-system disease, in people who are getting older, perhaps in people who don't have as many social supports. In the days of the sort of nuclear family, it sometimes, as people get older, they lose those family supports. The public hospital system often has to provide other things other than just acute medical treatment. However, the private hospital system and the private insurance system does volume very, very well. And they are able to very efficiently deal with short-stay admissions to hospital, day surgery, these days joint replacement surgery, hospital times often very short, and the private health industry is very efficient in the way it deals with these sort of issues. And we know that there already are enormous pressures on our public hospital system. And because of that, we need our private health insurance to be maintained. And we need to have people in the private health system. If we don't, the pressures on our public system will be completely overwhelming. And we're already feeling those pressures. We know there are huge cost of living pressures. Today, interest rates went up again, in particular for housing mortgages. My electorate of Macarthur has one of the largest mortgage stress and rental stress populations in the country. And we know with cost of living pressures, there is a temptation for people to drop out of private health insurance. And it's very important that whatever we do, we encourage people to stay in the private health insurance system. And these bills will help that by reducing the costs and hopefully reducing premium rises in the future. And that is very, very important. We have to ensure that we have that combination of public and private health systems working together. And that means that I am committed to private health insurance. I have private health insurance myself, and I've encouraged my family, who are now all adults, to have private health insurance themselves. Many people think that it's very similar organisations, the private and the public system. They're very different, they deal with different things, and they are better at dealing with different things. Australia has been a profitable and good market for many of the medical technology manufacturers, and they indeed have done well out of Australia. However, the world is changing. Increasingly, we have a larger middle-class population in Southeast Asia and to our north. India has a middle-class population of over 200 million people. We have large middle-class populations in Southeast Asia, in China, in Japan, etc., and they also will want to use the best medical technology they can, and Australia therefore will become a smaller proportion of the market. And it is important that we maintain our access to the latest medical technology in Australia to make sure that we get the very best treatment. Recently I was involved in lobbying for listing on the prostheses list a multi-channel cardiac catheter used to treat a cardiac rhythm abnormality called atrial fibrillation, where the heart top two chambers don't pump properly. They vibrate without pumping the blood. Blood can pool in the heart, clots can form, and they can go to the brain and cause a stroke. This multi-channel ablator catheter can be used to treat the atrial fibrillation and prevent stroke, and that is really important. But it took years, literally years, to have this approved in the system. We don't want to see that continue to happen. We want to get access to the newer technologies as soon as possible, and we want those companies that produce these devices, most of whom produce overseas, we want them to feel confident to bring them to Australia to make them available for the Australian population. So it's important that we make our systems as efficient as possible so that we do get these newer technologies available to the Australian people as soon as possible. They're not only life-saving, but they're lifestyle-saving. So quality of life is really important, and it can enable people to get back to work, it can get them out of hospital very quickly and prevent stroke. With the catheter, there are other devices, particularly with joint replacement, that have changed dramatically since the days when I was a resident and assisting at these operations. So it really is important that we do get this right, and I congratulate the Health Minister and the Albanese Labor government for bringing this bill to the House. It seeks to improve how we not only fund our devices, but gives more transparency to how we fund them, and it allows the private hospitals and the private insurance providers to understand better the costs and be able to reduce their own costs, which will, in time, reduce premiums and will reduce premium rises and will encourage people to stay in private health insurance. I know that there is a lot of pressure to reduce costs across the board, and I congratulate both the private health insurers and the MTAA and the private hospital system for working collaboratively to try and get the best results. This also will allow choice in the private system for patients and for doctors in implantable devices and treatments. This can be very important in things like choosing what sort of artificial heart valve to use, choosing these days the minimally invasive treatments via catheter rather than open heart surgery. It also means that there will be better and longer lasting joint replacements for things like hip replacement. Recently there's been new technology developed for shoulder replacement rather than shoulder reconstruction, which can lead these days now to much faster recovery, better recovery, less surgery time, less hospital time. And it is important that Australians have these things available to them. There are also some new techniques in management of congenital heart disease that can be done by minimally invasive therapy, and via a catheter we can replace heart valves, repair holes in the heart, and obviates the need to have open heart surgery on tiny newborn babies. So it is important that Australia does continue to have available to them the very latest technology. On a couple of occasions I've visited companies like Edwards Life Science, I think in the member for Bennelong's electorate, and I've actually been able to practice using their minimally invasive surgical techniques for doing closing holes in the heart and heart valve surgery, which is absolutely remarkable. And it is important that Australians do get these devices available to them, because if you have a newborn baby, if you can prevent open heart surgery, it will save lives, reduce hospital time, reduce the risk of other complications like neurological damage. And we must continue to have these devices available, and that's by introducing bills like this. This is a way that the Albanese government, as part of its complete overhaul of the health portfolio, will be able to make these treatments available for Australian children and their families. So, in summary, these measures, these bills support our goal as a government to make sure healthcare remains a priority for us in providing services to the Australian people. I commend the bill to the House. I thank the Health Minister for presenting this bill, and I thank you for your time. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to acknowledge the member for Macarthur's words and to commend the work that he does in the health field and his passion as well for health. Thank you. I rise to speak on this bill because as the co-chair of the newly formed Parliamentary Friends of MedTech, along with the member for Macarthur, I know how much technology is saving lives, and the progress in this country is quite extraordinary, and we should be supporting that innovation the best we can. I'd like to start by saying from the outset that the opposition does not oppose this legislation, and I understand that the bills are only the beginning of the process of much needed reform. But to also point out that I understand that stakeholders need a bit more consultation on these bills, and I hope the government will listen to these stakeholders and provide the substantive legislation quickly with that greater detail so that the industry can properly and appropriately administer any changes that come about due to the introduction of this bill. The part that I would like to particularly focus on in my speech today is around prosthesis, also known as artificial limbs, and these are devices that are designed to replace or support a missing or damaged body part, and they play a crucial role in helping people with disabilities to live a more active and independent life. The legislation sets out the requirements for the design, the manufacture and the supply of prosthesis, and ensures that they meet certain standards of safety, quality and performance. The prosthesis list also specifies the reimbursement levels for prosthesis, and I'm going to have a fun time saying that word multiple times in this speech, provided under the Medicare benefit schedule and the private health insurance arrangements. Prosthesis list legislation is important for several reasons, and firstly it ensures that people with disabilities have access to safe, high-quality prosthesis that meet their needs and allow them to live a more active and independent life. And by setting standards for the design and manufacture, the legislation helps to minimise the risk of adverse events and ensures that people live and they receive the best possible care. Secondly, the list legislation, if managed properly, could help to control costs and to make healthcare more affordable by patients. and by specifying the reimbursement levels provided under the NBS and the PHI arrangements, the legislation could ensure that people receive the care they need without incurring prohibitive costs. The prostheses list legislation has the ability to promote innovation, which is what is very important in the medtech field, and by encouraging manufacturers to develop new and improved prostheses that meets the standards set out by the legislation. It helps to spur the development of new technologies, and I know people that use these technologies are always on edge waiting for a new thing that improves their lives a little bit more. And from experience, I know this is very much the case. The PL legislation is an important piece of legislation that helps to ensure, as I said, the access to safe, high-quality prosthesis that meets people's needs. And by controlling the costs, it promotes innovation and, as I said, the legislation plays a critical role in helping the lives of people in Australia. Medical technology is critical to ensuring the Australian community has all the benefits of modern, reliable technology for better health outcomes. And the medtech industry in Australia represents manufacturers and suppliers of medical technology used in the diagnosis, prevention, treatment and management of disease and disability, and it's so broad in its range. And it provides the majority of non-pharmaceutical products used in the diagnosis and treatment of disease and disability in this country, and they play a critical role, the companies that are here and the healthcare professionals that are doing this extraordinary work. And I hope the reforms, if managed correctly, will provide and improve the affordability and value of private health insurance to Australians by keeping downward pressure on premiums while still maintaining access to high-quality medical devices. And it's important to note that Australia's medtech industry has led the way and has played a key role in reducing private health insurance premiums and is working through a phased reduction of prosthesis prices with the government through the prostheses list reforms program. And my friend and former colleague, the Honourable Greg Hunt, when Federal Health Minister, vowed to pave a smoother way towards the reform, and he signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Medical Technology Association of Australia in March of 2022. The the MTAA for short's chair, Mr Maurice Ben-Mayor, was thankful for the agreement's focus on recognising what he said was the explicit distinction between the public and private markets that still guarantees patient access and, importantly, doctor choice. And he was also thankful for the former minister's decision to lead the reforms away from abolishing the prosthesis list and towards a process that would provide greater certainty for medtech companies. And reform is necessary in the medtech industry, and there's certainly a need for fit-for-purpose and effective reforms to the PL that would reduce premiums while protecting the patient access and doctor choice guarantee of the PL. And I would also like to further talk about the work of former Minister Hunt and the Coalition Government's track record in the prosthesis list space. And the former government's budget, the Coalition, over 4 years was $22 million to reduce the cost of medical devices used in the private health care space, and this was also to assist in streamlining access to new medical devices to improve the affordability and value of private health insurance for Australians. And our plan included lowering prices for medical devices to allow for savings to flow through to customers. Our government was committed to its support for choice, value and high-end quality services for patients and their clinicians in the private health space, and wanted to continue work to ensure a simpler and more cost-effective private health sector and deliver record low premium changes for Australians to access private health insurance. When we left government, private health insurance membership was at new record levels, with more than 14 million Australians being covered. And our reforms delivered the 2022 premium change, which was the lowest in more than 21 years, and the 8th successive decline in premium changes since Labor's last year of government in 2013. And we increased the investment in the patient rebate for private health insurance from $5.4 billion to $6.9 billion. We implemented new, easy-to-understand classifications for private health insurance through the standard clinical definitions, better access to mental health, which I'm really passionate about, and better care in rural and regional Australia, and lower prices for medical devices, more flexibility for families and people with disabilities to receive their care. And I'm really encouraged that the member for Macarthur likes private health insurance, because it's not something the Labor government is particularly known for, but the Coalition recognises that Australia's health sector is strongest with both the public and private systems working together hand in hand to ensure access to healthcare for all Australians. And despite the Coalition's support for this package of bills, there are some concerns with the lack of detail provided by the government on certain key areas. The transparency that's required with important substantive details sitting beneath the legislation as this is being put forward to this parliament, it needs to happen, and there are a significant number of issues that may be subject to regulation under these bills that are yet to be resolved, including eligibility criteria, listing pathways, specifications for the calculation of cost recovery, regrouping and payments for removal items, to go into the technical details. And in addition, the department has not yet provided to stakeholders the updated prosthesis listing guide, although the bills confirm the regulatory status of the guide. The government seems to have also backed away from the Coalition government's commitment to enable a clear and standard pathway for non-implantable devices to be assessed for inclusion on the prosthesis list. Across the bills included in this package of measures, it was unfortunate that stakeholders were given less than 1 week to consider the exposure draft of this legislation. The bills provide little detail about the extent or specifying the powers to be implemented through uncited subordinate legislative instruments and mechanisms. The department has also flagged that PL changes will be implemented via an update to the PL rules, but it has not shared these proposed amended rules. So we need to see further detail on the subordinate legislation, questions like where are the regulations, what are the next steps in the reform agenda, and will the government provide more details so these issues of equity and affordability can be fully understood and debated. So I guess the call is to have more detail, less focus on headline announcements and aspirations, and a consideration of the important details that are necessary for the implementation of those announcements. So we are supportive of this bill, but we're putting the government on notice. They cannot continue to expect us to pass bills without seeing any of the substantive detail. I urge the government to address the significant challenges the industry faces and to engage with them and to provide those details that are currently missing in a timely way. And it's critical industry. It's a critical industry, and it's also critical that this industry understands how items on the list will be costed, setting in place a process to reduce the gap between the cost of medical devices in the public and private health sector. It will be the patients of Australia who will suffer if this isn't done with the utmost concentration on the provision of details. I know the medtech industry is behind it, ready to support and help, but we do urge the government to please provide those details as this legislation comes forth. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to support these bills as they seek to implement and modernise and improve the private health insurance prosthesis list. We know that the proposed legislation would amend private health insurance legislation to better define the items for which set benefits are paid by private health insurers, so that these benefits are only payable for medical devices or human tissue products that meet specific definitions. Importantly, these bills also update the cost recovery arrangements to provide for fee-for-service and levies that are consistent with the Australian Government's charging framework, and they continue on work from the 21-22 federal budget, where $22 million over 4 years was committed to modernising and improving this measure. The government has agreed to continue with these prosthesis list reform activities on the basis that the objectives are aimed at improving value for money for privately insured Australians. And naturally, we'll proceed with these reforms through our lens. Labor recognises that both public and private sectors play a critical role in Australia's world-class health system. We are a government that's concerned that Australians are abandoning private health insurance due to increasing costs and declining value. The bill's intent is to preserve clinician and patient choice in the private health system, assist in reducing benefits paid to private health insurers, and put downward pressure on private health insurance premiums. All those are very good things. They would update cost recovery arrangements to provide fee-for-service arrangements and the imposition of a cost recovery levy on each kind of medical device and human tissue product listed in the instrument. Passage of the bills before 1 July would allow the implementation of these actions, which is also a positive outcome. But, Deputy Speaker, you may or may not know, and as the member for Macarthur mentioned, some of the biggest medical device manufacturers and their peak industry body, the Medical Technology Association of Australia, are based in my electorate of Bennelong. And as you can probably understand, they've taken a little bit of interest in this legislation and thankfully have been intimately involved in the reform process. I'd like to thank them for bringing me, a new member, up to speed on this issue in a very short time. Had you asked me on the 20th of May 2022 what the prosthesis list was, I could have hand on heart said I would have had no idea what you're talking about. But thankfully, I'm a bit more across it, Deputy Speaker. From items on the general list to category and price bundling, Deputy Speaker, I now know who and what IHACPA is, which is exciting, and I felt that I've learned a lot about this issue in a very short time. Ultimately, what I understood very quickly was that this is an area of health policy that needed reform. The list can be arbitrary, the definitions are sometimes too narrow, and it is in desperate need of modernisation, given the extreme advances in technology that we see in this sector each and every day. I look forward to being part of a government that will continue on with this reform over the next few years. And this package of legislation represents the first chance the Parliament has to consider this reform that was announced in the 21-22 budget. As we heard, this is the first step in a longer process of enacting the reforms. And I guess the main message from my local constituents, be they those who work for these companies and the company in the medtech sector themselves, is that it's important that every area of the private health sector plays their part in ensuring the cost of private health insurance comes down. Medical devices represent 1/10 of private health insurance benefits paid and 9% of premium revenue growth since financial year 2013. Growth in device benefits are driven entirely by clinician and patient demand. Private health insurance sustainability must be achieved, and it can be achieved through wide-ranging reform, of which the prosthesis list is just one of them. This list is an important regulatory tool to ensure that patients in the private hospital system have access to this life-saving medical technology. It provides clarity in the delivery of healthcare by providing healthcare providers with a list of medical devices that will be covered by health insurers for policyholders with appropriate levels of hospital coverage. And as mentioned, this reform is aimed at making private health insurance more sustainable. As we all know, the cost of living pressures are hitting family budgets. Reducing the price of health insurance and putting downward pressure on insurance is a positive thing. This is part of broader and more urgent reforms to strengthen Medicare and resolve the crisis in primary care that we saw overseen by the former government. I've had the opportunity to visit many of these companies. The member for Macarthur mentioned Edward Life Sciences. There's also Medtronic, Johnson & Johnson, Abbott, and at the risk of not naming them all, I'll stop there. There are plenty. It's great to see that they're big employers locally and that they deliver great outcomes for patients across the country. I've also had the pleasure of meeting with locals in Bennelong whose lives have fundamentally benefited from access to this same medical technology. In the first few weeks since being elected, I met Andrew from West Ryde. Andrew was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was just 8 years old. Type 1 diabetes has completely dominated Andrew's daily life, particularly restricting his ability to hear, see, walk, work or drive. 4 out of the 5 members in his family have now been diagnosed with type 1. He was one of the many passionate locals in Bennelong that I met with before the election and after that received access to subsidised continuous glucose monitoring and flash glucose monitoring products, which this government was proud to subsidise from the 1st of July. His ability to access a constant glucose monitoring system has saved his life and made his life more livable. Devices on this list, which we're talking about today, and devices that seek to be added to it, are life-saving. I've visited and spoken to these companies and seen their commitments to their patients and their role in innovation, training, research, and as employers who are also committed to sustainability, equity and diversity. And the feedback that I've received from them, and many of those who work with them, is that they're very supportive of these reforms and their objectives. They would like to see the cost of private health insurance go down. The medtech sector, like any businesses, operate at capacity when they have certainty. They want to keep delivering innovation and better outcomes for their patients. I understand the sector, through the MTAA and individually, are having ongoing discussions with the Department of Health and Aged Care about the implementation of these reforms. And although I understand a number of areas remain outstanding, I'm confident that they'll be resolved in a timely manner. It's welcome that the Minister announced that the government will ensure alternative funding mechanism for the products that will be removed from the list will be mandated. That's positive, but the industry notes the detail are still to be determined. I'm confident that they'll be resolved in a timely manner. I'd like to use my time speaking on this bill to encourage the department and the medical device sector to continue to engage in good faith and in a transparent manner as they have been. Where detail is sought from the department, I'd encourage them to provide those details as quickly as possible. And where the department requires cooperation, I'd encourage all stakeholders to reach a common ground. Because at the end of the day, there are some really, really positive elements to this bill. Let's not forget about them. This reform will deliver savings to private health insurers, and if those savings are passed on, they'll result in costs of living easing for policyholders, and that is a really, really positive thing. I'd encourage all parties to ensure that those savings are passed on. Savings to policyholders are welcome and they are good. I look forward to receiving updates from the department about the ongoing process to simplify the prosthesis list and ensure it offers a fit-for-purpose pathway to assess medical technology. I also look forward to receiving positive news that all involved can have certainty throughout this process so that they can go back to focus on innovating for better patient outcomes. I'll be one of many, I can tell you, who'll be following this process as it comes to implementation on the 1st of July. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of this bill. Collectively, this collection of bills implements the first stage of long-awaited amendments to better administer medical device and prostheses pricing in Australia. They clarify the items that may be included on the list under the private health insurance rules and update cost recovery arrangements, implementing a levy for medical devices which will provide for the costs of assessing and administering applications. These are positive steps. Private Healthcare Australia advises that we pay in Australia some of the highest prices in the world for medical devices, on average 30 to 50% above the United Kingdom, Europe, South Africa and New Zealand. Australia's increasing private health insurance premiums are in part due to these costs. Case studies include a Bolt valued at $45, but with a list price of over $1,000. The egregious cost to consumers before this was resolved has never been recouped. And this is not a new scenario. My former Centre Alliance colleague, the former Senator Sterling Griff, was determined to address rampant overpricing in this area. Senator Griff fought for a Senate inquiry into the industry to look into the cost of medical devices and prostheses here and elsewhere, other potential pricing mechanisms and opportunities to create a more competitive basis for purchase and reimbursement of these items. Senator Griff argued that the failure of Australia's medical device pricing arrangements to keep pace with advancements elsewhere was costing Australian health consumers millions of dollars in higher premiums. And the other issue to this is all of the people that have left private health insurance because they just couldn't afford the premiums anymore, and then they are on long hospital waiting lists and they are often in excruciating pain for a long time, particularly with respect to hip replacements and knee replacements. There have been some improvements to scrutiny of the list, which has saved consumer dollars. In 2021-22, the former government committed to a number of initiatives to help further reduce the cost of medical devices for private patients. This package does go some way to assisting this and bringing former Senator Griff's work to fruition. However, I would be keen to see more done to support a robust compliance framework. The Therapeutic Goods Act provides for criminal and civil offences for misleading the Therapeutic Goods Administration about placing therapeutic goods on the Australian Register. Conversely, I'm told that there are no penalties for misleading the Department of Health to have an item placed on the prostheses list. Private Healthcare Australia is of the view that until the legislation is amended to include penalties for false and misleading statements in relation to the list, health funds and their members will continue to pay millions of dollars more in benefits each year than they should. I'm therefore pleased to hear that the government is currently exploring future work on a more robust compliance framework, and I encourage the government to move as quickly as possible on this to further reduce health insurance premiums and help lower the cost of living for millions of Australians. I commend this bill and support this bill in the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I would certainly like to thank the members for Macarthur, Lindsay, Bennelong and Mayo for their wonderful contributions and for their support of this bill. We've had a great deal of experience in this room, from the member for Macarthur, years of experience, the member for Lindsay and Mayo for their hard work that they do in this House on this issue, and of course the member for Bennelong, who said he's just learning about this now. But it's good to have him on board. Thank you. This package of 3 bills supports the implementation of the 2021-22 budget measure, modernising and improving the private health insurance prostheses list. These bills represent the first tranche of legislative changes required to fully implement measures that will support modernising and improving the private health insurance prostheses list. The first bill I introduced was the Private Health Insurance Legislation Amendment, Medical Device and Human Tissue Product List and Cost Recovery Bill 2022. The bill inserts definitions of medical devices and human tissue products into the legislation, which will better define the kinds of products that, along with the additional criteria contained in the legislative instrument, will be considered eligible for set benefits from private health insurers. The bill also provides for the renamed Private Health Insurance, Medical Devices and Human Tissue Products rules. This new name is reflective of the modernised and amended scope of the legislation. The bill also updates the cost recovery arrangements to support predictable and sustainable fee-for-service arrangements. The second bill I introduced is the Private Health Insurance Prostheses Application and Listing Fees Amendment Cost Recovery Bill 2022. This bill provides for levies payable by medical technology sponsors for the listing of medical devices and human tissue products. These levies are essential as they allow my department to administer the listings in a financially sustainable and appropriate manner. The third bill I introduced is the Private Health Insurance National Joint Replacement Register Levy Amendment and Consequential Amendments Bill 2022, which is machinery in nature only and does not change any current requirements or obligations. These bills will modernise and improve administrative processes and cost recovery arrangements. These long-awaited improvements will assist in keeping downward pressure on private health insurance premiums by reducing the costs associated with medical devices and human tissue products. The results will be improved affordability and attractiveness of private health insurance for consumers. Thank you.
The question is, there being no further speakers, I will put the question. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? Carried. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the law relating to private health insurance and for related purposes.
If no members wish to consider the bill in detail, I will put the report question immediately. The question is that this bill be reported to the House without amendment. All in favour? All against? Carried. There being no further we go straight to Clerk.
Government business, next order of the day. Private Health Insurance Prostheses Application and Listing Fees Amendment Cost Recovery Bill 2022. Resumption of debate on the second reading.
If no one wishes to consider the bill in detail, I will put the report question immediately. Apologies. I'll go back to the top. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I will put the question. All those in favour? All those against? Carried. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the Private Health Insurance Prostheses Application and Listing Fees Act 2007 and for related purposes.
If no member wishes to consider the bill in detail, I will put the report question immediately. The question is that the bill be reported to the House without amendment. All in favour? All against? Carried. Clerk.
Government business, next order of the day. Private Health Insurance National Joint Replacement Register Levy Amendment, Consequential Amendments Bill 2022. Resumption of debate on the second reading.
There being no further speakers, I'll put the question. All in favour? Sorry? The question is that the bill be now read a second time. All in favour? All against? Carried. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the Private Health Insurance National Joint Replacement Register Levy Act 2009 and for related purposes.
If no member wishes to consider the bill in detail, I will put the report question immediately. The question is that the bill be reported to the House without amendment. All in favour? All against? Carried. Clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 1, Annual Climate Change Statement 2022, resumption of debate.
And I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It is hard to remember that less than a year ago,
advocates for action on climate change, including Labor, had to warn the government of the time about the impacts of global warming. Students, the fire chiefs, business, all had to warn the government on this issue, and they were met with tin ears. That the government of the day, the Liberal National Government, couldn't agree to act seriously on this issue has been a real stain on Australia's history. What a contrast that now we have a government that recognises reality. We know that no Australian is spared from the impacts of climate change. And in areas like mine, the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury, we know that we're in the front line of extreme weather events. The Hawkesbury River has always been vulnerable and is now even more vulnerable. The mountainside has always had fires, but we now see them at such extreme levels. We face disasters frequently in my community. There's been 3 natural disasters in the last 3 years. But what we see is that these disasters are becoming increasingly devastating, increasingly frequent, and increasingly unnatural. If the trends continue and no action is taken, the temperatures that we experienced during the 2019-2020 summer will be the norm by 2040. That's what we'll get as an average summer by 2040. By 2060, they'll be considered a good year. Now, that just is totally untenable for my community, because it means that for the 150,000 plus people who live, it really, in the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury, it really won't be a place where you can happily live. Our suburbs and villages, our towns and our farms would likely not be habitable. Australia has wasted a decade in taking action, and now it's up to us, Labor, and it's urgent. 8 months ago, we were given a mandate by the Australian people to implement our climate change and energy policy, and since then we've acted. And the Minister's statement on the 1st of December last year, the annual climate change statement to Parliament, was a very strong symbol of how we'll do it differently. What I want to do is summarise some of the things that we have done in that 8 months, but I notice I've only got 7 minutes left, and there's no way I'll be able to get through everything that we've done in putting our climate plan into action. So let's see how we go. So we passed the climate change bill, which was the first real climate change bill in a decade. It tasked the Climate Change Authority to provide advice. It also meant that we put into legislation our targets, and that is 43% reduction in emissions by 2030, as well as having our net zero target by 2050. So that was one of the first things we did. We then got endorsement at the Pacific Island Forum leaders to take forward a bid to co-host the COP29, because we want to be on the world stage, working with the world, saying, here's how we've done it. Can we get, let's share these ideas and let's all push each other to do more. Energy ministers from around the country and the state, and each state and territory, put emissions reductions goals into the National Electricity Objective. We have opened up the dialogue with the states on how we do this across the country. We got agreement to the Energy Market Operators Integrated Systems Plan to upgrade our electricity grid. We have had the Priority Gas Market Reforms Package so that we can avoid shortfalls, because we want to do this in a way that supports businesses going forward. We want our businesses to keep thriving, and we want people to transition. We've made sure the Renewable Energy Agency can't invest in things like coal and gas. We shouldn't have had to have done that. That really should have been had absolute bipartisan support, but we had to do that. We're reforming the safeguard mechanism to reduce the emissions from Australia's biggest emitters. And again, it would be terrific to see bipartisan support on that because it's essential to our way forward. We've also done a review so we can, and that's underway, so we can have confidence in our carbon credit system. We've passed the electric car tax discount through the House of Representatives to make electric vehicles more affordable. And I saw today that there's been an almost doubling of the number of EVs in Australia in the past 12 months. We have Australia's first real national electric vehicle strategy. That's a 21st century thing that we could have had 20 years ago. We've limited the amount of sulphur in our petrol, saving millions in health-related costs, all part of ensuring that we move towards renewables. We've expanded the nationwide House Energy Rating Scheme to support stronger energy efficiency provisions in the National Construction Code, because this is a place where we can get energy efficiency as well, and that will help our climate. We've announced the first areas for offshore wind development in Australia to continue our path to becoming a renewable energy powerhouse, another opportunity that these changes give us. We've appointed an Australian ambassador for climate change. We've delivered a $67 million package of reforms to modernise energy market regulation with the states and territories. And I do congratulate the states and territories of all colours for working with us on these measures. The Community Batteries for Household Solar Grants program is $224.3 million, and I'm very pleased to see that expressions of interest are open for that. And my community will benefit in the first pilot round with 2 of those community batteries, one in Hobartville in the Hawkesbury and one in the mountains in East Blaxland. Now, these are areas where we know people have invested in solar panels on their roof, but they haven't been able to invest in their own solar battery. So this is a sensible way to allow communities to share in a piece of infrastructure. We'll provide the infrastructure, they can pump their solar into it, pull it out when they need it, and there'll be opportunities for others to involve. Our first 400 community-scale batteries will support up to 100,000 Australian households. There's also the $102 million for community solar banks, and this will assist 25,000 Australians living in apartments, rentals and low-income households across Australia. It is hard for renters to get the same sorts of energy savings, and especially those who want to do their bit to reduce emissions. We've invested $63 million in dispatchable storage technologies such as large-scale battery projects, $62.6 million for an energy efficiency grants program for small and medium-sized businesses to reduce energy use and lower energy bills, and I'd urge people to look into that. There's $83.8 million to develop and deploy First Nations community microgrid projects for remote communities. There's $5 million in successful grant applications for R&D for low-emissions feed supplements for grazing animals. And we've joined the Global Methane Pledge. And I think what that shows is that we've had a spread of projects here. We recognise that no one sector is the answer. And while we want to see 82% renewables in the electricity system, and we know that we have to work across all the sectors. We've also significantly signed a partnership to jointly fund the critical Marinus Link transmission project. That's the one between Tassie and the mainland, and recognising the power that Tasmania has in renewable energy. We've signed agreements to jointly fund Victorian offshore wind projects. We've got tight and noxious emission standards for new trucks and buses, again demonstrating it isn't just the energy sector, it is also the transport sector that we are helping and supporting through this process. We've introduced guaranteed minimum stock levels of traditional transport fuels because we know consumers have to be protected from major disruptions, because this transition involves initiatives to take us further, but also things to support business and individuals and help them transition through. We have fundamentally restored...
Order. A division has been called in the
that is
House. The
inconvenient.
proceedings have been suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions.
Well, the question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Discussing the first annual climate change statement tabled during this 47th Parliament is a historic moment, one my community of North Sydney fought long and hard for. To have the advice which is being used by this government to inform its climate policy made publicly available for all to see is an important step in ensuring greater transparency and accountability in our legislative processes. Ultimately, it will contribute to sound decision-making and faster action on climate change led by facts, not politics. I'm proud to say my community's advocacy played an integral role in enabling this transparency. On August 4th last year, on behalf of my North Sydney community, I moved a successful amendment to the climate change bills to strengthen the parliamentary transparency over advice provided to the government by ensuring a copy of what is provided is not just published on the website, but is also officially tabled in the House. This may seem like such a simple, obvious amendment, but fundamentally it strengthened our democracy. We have a steep road ahead of us. Strong ambition requires even stronger action, and I'm here today to reiterate my community's commitment to that action. Now is not the time to settle, it is the time to press on. I acknowledge that 2021-22 was a landmark year in Australia's progress towards our climate goals. The legislating of net zero by 2050 and a stronger 2030 target are significant developments, as is commencing the implementation of the government's Powering Australia plan. I note the government's announcement of Australia's Disaster Recovery Fund to contribute to national climate change risk and the creation of the first National Energy Transformation Partnership. I also note their commitment to fast-tracking offshore wind industry and renewable energy zones and accelerating Australia's renewable energy transformation. But I also want to acknowledge the gaps present in the government's response to the authorities' advice. The advice that Australia needs to address the practical barriers to success in supply chains, workforce capacity and project approval timelines. The advice that Australia needs a long-term strategy for emissions reductions, a strategy that sets expectations for when, how and by how much emissions should be reduced across different sectors of the economy. The advice that the government needs indicators in place for detailed sector-by-sector emissions reductions plans, not only electricity, industry and carbon farming, and all newly extended targets to industrial facilities covered by the Safeguard Mechanism. I specifically want to address the advice provided by the authority, which calls for a radical shift in momentum towards decarbonisation. The advice itself says, and I quote, "Australia will need to decarbonise at an average annual rate of 17 million tonnes carbon dioxide per year to meet its climate goals, more than 40% faster than it has since 2009. It concerns me that despite this advice, the government has not put a halt to new coal and gas extraction projects. Fossil fuel production in Australia is projected to grow through to 2030. How can this be consistent with the government's ambitions? Scientific evidence tells us fossil fuels must stay in the ground for the world to remain within the bounds of irreversible global warming. Yet in Australia, we seem intent on writing our own version of the truth. Right now in New South Wales, Australian fossil fuel company Santos has federal and state approval to develop a new coal seam gas field over 95,000 hectares of the Pilliga State Forests and privately owned farmland southwest of Narrabri, which is in northwest New South Wales. Pilliga Forest is recognised as one of the most important areas for biodiversity in eastern Australia. It is home to at least 300 native animal species and more than 900 plant species, and is the largest remaining area of native forest west of the Great Dividing Range. Pilliga sits on top of the Great Artesian Basin, one of the largest artesian water basins in the country. The multi-billion-dollar Narrabri gas project includes the drilling of 850 gas wells and a gas pipeline which will run from Narrabri to Newcastle. Around each one of these 850 wells, a piece of land the size of a football field will be cleared. Liverpool Plains and Pilliga gas projects desperately need federal intervention, not approval. If the government is serious about meeting Australia's ambitious climate targets with real action, projects like this cannot simply be given a green light without significant national scrutiny. The tabling of the first annual climate change statement is indeed a historic moment, but now is the time for embracing the independent advice and stepping up to the challenge of faster action on climate. Thank you.
I thank the member for North Sydney. The question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Australians voted at the federal election last year to end a decade of denial and delay on climate change. In my electorate of Corangamite, which includes the Great Ocean Road, the Bellarine, the Surf Coast and parts of Geelong, people were fed up with government inaction on climate change, the most significant threat of our time. They were frustrated by a government which had 22 attempts at an energy plan but failed to land on any of them. People across our nation are rightly concerned about the state of the environment their children, our children, will inherit. They worry about the changing weather patterns and the environmental damage they see in their communities across the nation and the globe. Climate change has moved from a theory to a prediction to a reality, and that's why it's crucial that we act decisively now. And that's precisely what the Albanese government has been doing in a relatively short space of time since being elected last May. We've hit the ground running. The Albanese government's climate change legislation passed through Parliament last year. It enshrined in law an emissions reduction target of 43% from 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. The government brought together business, industry, unions, farmers, community and conservation groups, all of whom have asked the Parliament to put Australia on the path to net zero emissions. The legislation ensures accountability through an annual update to Parliament by the Climate Change Minister on the progress being made towards the target. It also empowered the Climate Change Authority to provide advice to government on future targets. This government is showing the world that Australia is open for business, with a stable investment environment to unleash billions of dollars of renewable energy investment and net zero emissions technology and the jobs that come with it. As promised, the Albanese government is being open, accountable and transparent, having tabled its first annual statement on climate change, together with the accompanying advice of the Independent Climate Change Authority. In contrast, the previous government left their projected emission reductions by 2030 at only 30%. The projections tabled by the minister show the actions and policies of the Albanese government have increased this projection to 40% so far. That is, we've lifted the outlook by a third in the first 6 months of the Albanese government. As the Climate Change Authority advice makes clear, to achieve this target, we will need to achieve the same emissions reductions in the next 7 to 8 years that have been achieved in the past 18 years in total. Since 2009, Australia has decarbonised its economy at an average rate of 12 million tonnes of carbon a year. To achieve a 43% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050, this decarbonisation rate needs to be at least 17 million tonnes of carbon a year, a 40% increase. Increased dispatchable storage will also be essential. After 10 years during which 4 gigawatts of dispatchable generation left the grid and only 1 gigawatt of dispatchable capacity did enter the market, we will need to install much more clean dispatchable power in the coming 7 to 8 years. And of course, this all comes in the shade of the biggest energy crisis ever to face the modern world, bigger even than the oil crisis of the 1970s. Our long-term plan is to power our economy with the cheapest form of energy, renewable energy, and in turn to harness the economic opportunities which come with it. Currently, a third of Australia's emissions come from our electricity system. Over the next 7 to 8 years, we will need to transition our electricity system to 82% renewables from the current base of around 30%. The most important thing we can do is to rewire our nation, because there will be no transition without effective transmission, and there will be the jobs that go with that. Our first budget allocated the necessary $20 billion of investment. Importantly, we've finalised agreements for the first projects. The Marinus Link, which has been talked about for years, is now going to be a reality. The two cables between Tasmania and the mainland will see the Apple Isle move from between 100% renewables to 200% renewables. This is the equivalent of emissions reduction of taking 1 million cars off the road. Likewise, our investments in the link between Victoria and New South Wales, Kerang Link, and the co-investment with the Victorian Government in renewable energy zones and offshore wind are vital in our efforts. In addition, the budget funded our commitment to 400 community batteries, and the program is underway. I'm pleased to say that one community battery will be installed in my electorate of Corangamite in the Sands Estate in Torquay. It is a brilliant outcome, and I thank the people for their advocacy for that battery and looking forward to more submissions. Last year's budget also abolished the failed underwriting New Generation Investments program and replaced it with a new program to help finance new renewable energy storage. And so we are doing a great deal. There is so much more that needs to be done. But we won't reduce emissions unless we reduce them from our top 200 industrial emitters. So we need to reform a safeguard mechanism which governs the emissions of our biggest industrial emitters. A process has begun to enable credits to be provided to large industrial facilities which come in under their safeguard mechanism baselines, incentivising them to innovate and adopt emissions reductions technology. Around 70% of facilities are owned by companies committed to net zero. They account for over 80% of safeguard facility emissions. It's essential that the reforms commence from the 1st of July this year. This is ambitious but achievable. Deputy Speaker, how we move around our country has a big impact on how we emit emissions. Our government inherited a situation in which just 2% of car sales were electric, 5 times below the international average. Last year, Parliament passed our electric vehicle tax cut, cutting $9,000 a year from the cost of an Australian business from the cost of the tax, and providing Australian business opportunities for a $50,000 electric vehicle bonus to employees. The budget also funded our Driving the Nation investments in cleaner and cheaper transport, including a national electric vehicle charging network to roll out a faster charger system, one that goes for 150 kilometres before you get your next charging on our highways. So we have to work on that as well. We need more charging stations. And we're delivering solar banks to provide access to renewable energy to low-income families. And we're leading by transforming our own federal government to be net zero by 2030. We've also committed to practical actions in the land and agricultural sectors, driving abatement and incentives through carbon markets that have integrity and cut pollution. And we're returning our country to full international engagement and leadership on climate. The Climate Change Authority recommends that the government begins work on a plan to guide the nation's efforts towards achieving net zero, which we agree with and will prepare. The authority also points out that while technology exists to meet our 2030 targets, there are significant labour market and supply chain challenges as every country around the world strives to meet their targets. Again, we agree. Providing the trading and investment in clean energy and decarbonising our workforce was a major focus of our Jobs and Skills Summit last July. Our policy of 10,000 new energy apprentices, which we're implementing, is a great start, but we know more needs to be done. Right around the country, Australians are living with the consequences of climate change right now, so we need a comprehensive plan for adaptation and climate risk assessment. Working closely with the states and territories, that's exactly what we will do. Australia's regional experiences our regions have experienced some of the worst climate change impacts. and they also have the opportunity to be at the heart of our clean energy revolution. And that's why Regional Australia is at the core of our government's plan, to ensure Australia takes advantage of the economic opportunities that come with climate change action. So, in tabling this report, the Minister emphasised the cost of climate change that we are already facing. It will get worse. It's not too late, though, to avoid climate emergency, and it is our job to act with urgency. Australia truly needs a Labor government to ensure we become a renewable energy superpower. Thank you.
And I thank the member for Corangamite for her contribution. The question is that the document be noted. I give the call to the member for Wentworth.
Thank you. Deputy Speaker, the first legislation I spoke on in this place was a Climate Change Bill 2022. This was a critical piece of legislation that enshrined our country's commitment to net zero by 2050 and helped to provide the kind of policy certainty that businesses across Australia need to invest for the future. One of the most important provisions of this bill is the transparency required from government on the progress Australia is making towards its emission reduction targets. Transparency measures that were significantly strengthened by amendments made to the bill by members of the crossbench. Today, I am pleased to see this transparency in action. And the evidence is clear that this parliament, with an expanded crossbench on both houses, has already delivered much stronger climate action than the last. And it has delivered on several areas that matter most to my community in Wentworth: in legislated climate targets, action on the fossil fuel price crisis, and a commitment to the National Electric Vehicle Strategy. But while this statement shows that progress has been made in the last 8 months, it also makes clear that the government's approach is insufficient to even meet its modest target of 43%. Under the baseline scenario, which reflects policies actually implemented, we're only like to see a 32% reduction in emissions by 2030. Even with the strong execution of current policies, we will only see emissions reduced by 40%. And in some areas like transport, our emissions are still rising and not expected to fall below current levels for well over a decade. And so the first point to be made clear from the annual climate change statement is that the government must do more. And there are two golden opportunities in front of us, opportunities that could reduce our emission and save Australian families money on their energy bills. The first of these opportunities is to electrify Australian households and power them with the cheapest home energy in the world, rooftop solar. By switching out our expensive gas appliances for more efficient electrical alternatives, like heat pumps and electric stovetops, the average Australian household could cut its energy use in half. And if these appliances were powered by rooftop solar, with a backup battery in the garage for when the sun isn't shining, the average household in Wentworth could go zero emissions and save more than $3,000 a year on their energy bills. Rewiring Australia estimate that if we add up across Australia's 10 million households, and we could cut emissions around 40% of our emissions in the domestic economy and save more than $300 billion between now and 2035. That is good value for money, and it's real impact for real people. As a CEO of Sydney Renewable Power Company, I've seen firsthand the massive positive impact that cheap rooftop solar can have on energy bills and emissions. And there are numerous examples across my community in Wentworth, from Nick in Bondi, who electrified his home in solar and saw his power bills plummet as a result, to the Holdsworth Community Centre in Woollahra, whose solar array means that they now spend less on power bills and more on delivering services like childcare, dementia support and NDIS advice to the people who need them most. But to seize this opportunity, we need governments to make it easier for households to get off expensive gas, and we need it to make it easier for families to overcome the upfront cost of these technologies. In supporting electrification, we need to go beyond a one-size policy fits all measures that work for detached houses in outer suburbs, but don't provide meaningful support for those living in high-density inner-city areas like Wentworth. Because it's those people living in apartments, often young people, often renters, often those without much money to invest in upgrading their home, who have the most to gain from electrification opportunity, but are the least likely to be able to seize it. Either because they're reliant on their landlord to install solar, or they're faced with a dizzying array of regulations when they try and get together a strata committee to make the change themselves. That's a situation facing many people in my electorate of Wentworth, 60% of whom live in apartments, and more than half of whom are renters, and nearly 40% of those are under 40. And that same situation is facing nearly 3 million Australian households across the country who live in rental properties. So the government needs to be ambitious in pursuing the electrification opportunity, and it needs to ensure it provides tailored support for people in apartments and rental properties. If the government is serious about climate, and if it is serious about reducing cost of living pressures, May's budget must be the time it seizes this electrification opportunity. The budget package must include direct incentives for households to electrify, either in form of concessionary finance or tax incentives. It must broaden the remit of its existing solar banks program so that strata managers and owners corporations can access zero-interest loans to install shared solar behind the meter on apartment rooftops. And it must kick off a serious process of regulatory reform to break the barriers facing renters who can't access rooftop solar, including by developing a national regulatory framework to share the power bill savings between landlords, who pay the upfront cost of installation, and renters who live in the property. But beyond household electrification, the government must also follow through on its commitment to design and implement an ambitious national electric vehicle strategy. That means urgently legislating strong fuel efficiency standards so that Australian consumers have access to a broad range of the cheaper EVs. And it means putting their foot on the floor on ensuring that there's EV charging infrastructure. We need an estimated 130 of these in Wentworth, these fast chargers, by 2030, so that we don't continue to see power cords strung across the pavements because people in apartments have nowhere to charge their vehicles. Deputy Speaker, the first annual climate change statement showed that the progress the Parliament has made so far, but it also shows that we have much more to do. Turbocharging household electrification, in particular the installation of solar on apartment buildings, is a key part of this, as is accelerating the rollout of EVs. But let's not forget, 43% is an unambitious goal. So as we look forward, the government also needs to get climate target that is aligned with the science. And so I urge them to set a 75% emissions reduction target by 2035. It's aligned with the Paris Agreement, it's backed by the Investor Group on Climate Change, and it will enable us to unlock billions of dollars in capital for the transition to cleaner, cheaper, renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank the member. The question is that the document be noted, and I give the call to the member for Dunkley.
30 seconds. Thank you. This is a historic document. For the first time ever, this parliament is taking climate change seriously, and I am so proud to be a part of it. It's time to stop arguing about climate change, to stop putting roadblocks up to becoming a renewable energy superpower in this country, because otherwise history is going to judge this parliament and the members in it as being part of the problem and not part of the solution. And the annual climate change statement and the measures that Minister Bowen has put in around that statement is a quantum leap forward for this parliament to speak positively about the solutions. We have a long way to go in this country, there is no doubt, but with goodwill and application from everyone, with members of this parliament choosing to work together for the good of the future, and not to take idealistic and road-blocking positions from either side of the debate, the climate change deniers to those that would put the perfect before reality, we can actually achieve a better future, both in terms of the protection of our planet, but in terms of the smart, well-paid, rewarding jobs that we know can come from a manufacturing industry that focuses on renewables and renewable energy. I have a lot more to say, but I'm conscious that we are at the end of the time for this debate, but I'll just keep talking until... Deputy Speaker, are we at the end of time for this debate?
Yes. Member for Dunkley, there was some confusion here that government business would be going through to 7:30, but I am advised by the clerk that we will be going to the grievous debate as soon as you finish.
I will finish now in order to facilitate that, Deputy Speaker.
With a sigh of relief from the member for Dunkley, I suspect.
And everyone who's sick of my voice, because I also have a grievance debate slot, so
And
I'll sit down.
I thank the member for Dunkley. It being 6:30 p.m, the debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 192B. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made an order of the day for the next sitting. And if your speech wasn't interrupted, that's the end of your speech, the member for Dunkley? Good, I thank you. The question before the House now is that grievances be noted. Is anyone seeking the call?
Thank you. The member for Wentworth was before me, but I'll just keep talking, shall I?
Yes, I don't know what's going on there with the member for Wentworth, but if you're ready to go, member for Dunkley, I'll give the call to the member for Dunkley.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I've been thinking a lot lately about well-being, and many people know that the concept of Australia adopting something that looks like a well-being budget, or as the Treasurer is talking about in the consultation he has open at the moment, measuring what matters, is something that I've been interested in and talking about for a number of years now. But it's clear that well-being is a concept that's ill-defined in some ways in debate. It's a little bit like resilience, which is something I've also been thinking a lot about. We often use these words with an assumption that everyone who's listening to us thinks about them in the same way, or that it means the same thing to everyone. But it can mean a whole raft of things, well-being, depending on what's happening in a person's life or in their community or in their country. You know, well-being can mean physical health. It can literally mean whether or not you have an illness or a disease, an acute or chronic condition. It can mean whether you're fit, whether you have a good diet, whether you smoke or drink to excess. Well-being can mean how your emotional and mental state is faring, whether you're lonely and disconnected, whether you're positive and happy. Well-being, many people have contended, and I'm one of them, can mean how your community is faring. Is your community connected and happy? Are there enough jobs? Can people get the sort of work that they want, which have good conditions and are well paid? Can small businesses thrive and compete with the conglomerates? What's your local economy like? Well-being is whether you can walk in the park and breathe in clean air, whether you have a park, whether your native flora and fauna is thriving or dying, whether the oceans are swimmable and the mountains are still there to climb and the ice is still there if we want to visit the poles of our globe. Well-being can mean that the economy of a country is thriving, because that's essential to deliver not just economic well-being, but houses that people can live in and water that people can drink and those well-paid jobs and industries. Well-being, I think, means all of those things. And they are all connected and indivisible. And I don't think in this parliament, perhaps, and I mean this place, not just the current parliament with the members in it, that we always think deeply enough or have the time and the space to think deeply enough about what well-being is and whether we're here to try to help deliver it, and if we are, how we would go about that. it's one of the reasons I know that the Treasurer has said a budget or a process that counts what matters and reports on what matters is something that he is working towards implementing in this parliament and for our country. Recently I was talking, as I do, about metastatic breast cancer, and the Breast Cancer Network put out a report at the end of last year which to emphasise that whilst we have national registers, for example, that note when a person is diagnosed with cancer and when they die of cancer, we don't record on registers when people are diagnosed with metastatic cancer, particularly metastatic breast cancer. So there's no sort of national record of how many people in this country have metastatic breast cancer, although some modelling would suggest it's currently about 10,500 people. And the phrase that comes from some of that I've been thinking about is, if you aren't counted, you don't count. Because it's very hard to know whether we have enough resources directed towards support for the people and the families who have metastatic cancer are adequate, are doing what they should be doing. If we're not counting how many people have metastatic breast cancer and using the data to see what's happening. And I think that's the concept that goes back to wellbeing. Obviously, how well and how long you can live with a chronic condition like metastatic breast cancer is part of wellbeing, but counting what matters and amplifying what matters is how we will get better at delivering wellbeing. And I've used this quote a number of times in this parliament and things that I've written, but I've yet to find anything, I think, that encapsulates what I'm trying to talk about better. It's from a 1968 speech by US Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and he's talking about approach to measuring success of a country. And he says, and I quote, "The gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile." So that's why I come back often in my meandering thoughts, a little bit like my meandering speech today, to why we should be not only measuring gross domestic product, which is essential and important, why we should not only be talking about the economy growing in Australia, we should be talking about things like the economy growing in a sustainable and equitable manner, about it delivering for everyone, including, or in particular, those who are worse off, and why we should be talking about economic growth being a vehicle for us to support everything that makes life worthwhile. So innovative, inclusive and resilient Australia should be a bipartisan objective, and I think it is. But I come back to where I started. It might depend on how you define those words when you use them. You know, resilience is used at the moment for everything from a quarantine facility in the Northern Territory to helping children who are struggling with the return to school after years of COVID and shutdowns. And we talk about it a lot in the context of a climate change debate. We talk about it a lot in the context of people who have suffered serious health conditions and are able to, or at least look able to, get on with life. We talk about it in terms of businesses and whether they can survive. But what does resilience really mean, and how is it connected to well-being? You know, does resilience mean we accept more floods, more bushfires, more extreme weather events, but we build better infrastructure that can resist it, is resilient to it? Or does it mean that we build an approach where our economy is resilient to needing to use non-renewable energy to be able to get by, and we're resilient because we are fighting the impacts of climate change? I don't have any answers to all of those things, but I think it's a conversation worth having more broadly.
And I thank the member for Dunkley. The question is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I wanted to talk today about what is ahead, for what I'm trying to pursue for Wentworth. And so what I really wanted to do is start out with someone who I've talked a lot about, a guy I met back on the campaign trail, Sean from Bondi. And he was wheeling, is still very vivid in my mind. I was on Bondi Beach, and he was wheeling his, on the promenade by Bondi Beach, and he was wheeling his probably 2 or 3 year old on a tricycle along the promenade. And I said to him, look, what's important to you? And he said, for me, the environment's really important. I live in Bondi because I love the natural environment. I want to give this to my children. He said, I want us to be a kind society. I want us to be a decent society. And then finally, he said, I'm a small business owner, and that's really important to me, the economics, the cost of living. And I think those values are still so true to whole of Wentworth, and were very true on that day and have stuck with me. And so what I wanted to do today was to try and outline what I'm hoping to achieve with Wentworth and for Wentworth this year. So to start out on climate, on the environment, because that's what he identified. What I've seen and talked to people in Wentworth is they want ambition on climate change. They want us to have science-based targets, but which can also be deliverable, practically deliverable for the economy as well. And so that is why I'm advocating for a 75% reduction by 2035, because it can achieve both those things. But they also want to be able to make that change themselves in their local community. And I think there are really three key things here. That's about household electrification. That's about rooftop solar, particularly for people in my community who are renters, apartment dwellers, and live in stratas. And then finally, that's about EVs, electric vehicles and electrical charging infrastructure. And that's going to be the focus of what I'm going to do. Because we've consulted the community. We had Wentworth's Climate Action Summit last year. We've sat down with the state members and with the local councils. And there's a real appetite for change for these local issues, but also making a change at a national level. And that's what I'm seeking to do. National issues, but then local action. So on household electrification, we want to turbocharge the uptake of efficient electrical devices powered by rooftop solar, and which is the cheapest electricity in the world. And I think to drive that, we'll need concessionary finance in the budget to help low middle income houses electrify in particular, and also the bulk retrofit of public and social housing. On rooftop solar, there's a critical missing gap for renters and apartment dwellers who cannot access rooftop solar. It's almost 20 years ago I was involved in Sydney Renewable Power Company. 10 years ago I was involved in Sydney Renewable Power Company, and we set up a solar company purely to deal with renters and apartment dwellers who couldn't access solar, but they still, 10 years on, still can't access the benefits of solar on apartment roofs or if they are renters. And so that is a critical area for change. And that means broadening the remit of existing solar banks programs so that strata managers and owners corporations can access the loans as part of this. We need regulatory reform to break the barriers facing renters who can't access rooftop solar. And we need mandatory information disclosure on household energy bills when renting. And then the final piece on climate is EVs and EV infrastructure. including driving the uptake of EVs across the country, which are things like strong mandatory fuel efficiency standards and targeted investment and supporting the investment, public and private, in charging infrastructure, particularly on the streets of Wentworth, because so many of us don't have garages and or off-street parking. And an electric vehicle task force to coordinate a national uptake in electric vehicles. So those are some of the key priorities for me in terms of climate, but I will also be supporting key action on the environment, such as the review of the EPBC Act and to end native forest logging. The second piece that Sean asked me was to be kind. He wanted an inclusive, kind society. And there are some things that people in Wentworth have said are really important to them. They want action on refugees. They want to end the indefinite detention of refugees, and they want to give those on temporary visas a pathway to permanency, a pathway to putting down permanent roots in this country. Now, I'm disappointed so far that the government has made commitments on particularly that reduction in giving people a pathway to permanency, but we have not had the detail or yet the action. So I will be keeping up the pressure on the government in relation to refugee policy, particularly on the abolishment of TPVs and CHEVs. They want, a lot of people talk to me about the health system. There's real concern about, GP access and, what does it mean in a kind society if people can't access GPs? But an issue that I remember was raised a lot with me in the electorate is around youth mental health. And I heard a lot of that in the election time. I remember very vividly one woman coming out of a polling booth and saying to me, holding her daughter's hand, she's, with tears in her eyes, she said, "I just voted for you." And she said, "My daughter is 13. She could not access mental health support for her eating disorder, and it has absolutely torn our family apart. I want you to do something about that." And I think it's not just eating disorders. It's the issue of youth mental health is an absolutely critical issue, for the community, but also for Wentworth in particular, because the annual rate of death by suicide has risen from 10 per 100,000 young people to 14, a 40% increase in the last decade. We are getting richer, but our younger people are killing themselves in record numbers. And this is while it's more typical for males and females, the rate has almost doubled from females over the decade, from 3.7 to 6.6. This is both a youth mental health crisis. It's also an issue that particularly affects young men as well as young women. And I think young men haven't had a strong voice in this area, and I will be working with my community on youth mental health. And in that lastly, on the kind society, I think there are two other things I want to mention. One is about a second public high school, because my community in Wentworth wants us to invest in the community, and they want to have great educational choice. We have wonderful private high schools and a great public high school. We have great public and private primary schools, but only one public high school in an electorate of ours is really disproportionate, and we know that families are seeking additional public education. On kindness, I will also be very much supporting the Voice to Parliament, and that's my community group, Wentworth for the Voice, absolutely passionate about that. So as part of this kind society that Sean and others have asked me to pursue, I think that the Voice to Parliament is absolutely critical, and I'm looking forward to engaging the community on this. And then finally, I don't forget that Sean said he's a business person, and that's one of his most important priorities. And certainly as a business person, as someone who studied economics, it's also one of mine. And so I will be leading also discussion on economic policy, because frankly, we haven't had economic reform in this country for around 2 decades. And that means that we are missing out on opportunities to better enable people to access the prosperity that comes with strong economic reform, as well as ensuring that we can supply great services. So the areas I'll be pushing on are firstly monetary policy. We have a huge challenge of getting inflation under control. The RBA, for example, has raised rates again. I think it's for the 9th time for the families, and this is not going to be the last time. We have a huge challenge here. And so this is going to, we are reviewing monetary policy, but we also then need to look at fiscal policy, because at the moment, the high level of government spending, it's a record level of 27% of GDP, is part of the reason why inflation is so high, and we absolutely need to address that. And in addressing fiscal policy, fiscal policy pays for really, really important things that we all value, but there isn't enough focus on, is the dollar that we're spending the most effective use of that dollar? Are we getting real value for that? You know, one of my colleagues spoke just now about, you know, measuring what matters, talking about, you know, measuring outcomes that really matter to people, like well-being, you know, like health, like education outcomes. They're really important. But we should know whether the dollar that we're spending is getting the best possible outcome for that investment. And so I'll be advocating, you know, for greater scrutiny and accountability on existing spending projects, and including infrastructure spending. I will also be advocating, and have been advocating, on tax reform. Again, you know, it's not an area that everybody's interested in, but frankly, you know, tax experts, Treasury, international groups like the OECD all agree that we need to change our tax mix. And, you know, particularly with, you know, with this high level of inflation, you know, Australian people, Australian, you know, workers are paying more and more tax as their bracket creeps up with a really high inflation. So it is actually time to really address that for the community. And this is about, for me, both about making sure we're a productive nation, but it's also that we're fair to the community, to the generation that comes underneath. And the last piece I'll be focusing on is ensuring that Australia is the best place to do business. It's going to be a big year ahead, and those are just the things I'm going to try, but there'll be a lot else will be thrown at me. But these are some things you asked for, Wentworth. Thank you.
And I thank the member for Wentworth. The question is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I would like to pay tribute to the residents of Fraser who have been honoured with Order of Australia medals this year. Underpinning their long-standing community service are personal stories of resilience, generosity and determination. Their stories go a long way to explain why they continue to give back so much to the community. Many of those honoured are from migrant communities who have repaid many times over the faith that Australia invested in them decades ago. Elizabeth Drozd, the CEO of Australian Multicultural Community Services, was honoured for her 30-year-plus service to Victoria's multicultural communities. A mentor, a leader and a champion of anti-ageism, she is also a fierce advocate for multicultural communities. Elizabeth fled Poland as a 21-year-old just months before martial law was opposed. Having lived all her life under communist rule with no freedom of speech, no freedom of association, the living in fear, the constant rationing and the empty shelves, Elizabeth could see no end to suffering. She still remembers the day she was handed her passport, the first in her family to be granted one. It felt so much bigger than winning Tats Lotto. It meant freedom. There's no price you can put on freedom, she said. All her plans had to be made in secret. She still remembers saying goodbye to her family at the bus stop and her mum asking, "When will I see you again?" Elizabeth never saw her again as she died 6 years later. The price of her escape was high. Her 5 siblings were punished for 4 years, denied permission to travel. It took 10 years before they were granted permission to leave the country. After spending 9 months in a camp on the outskirts of Vienna, Elizabeth was granted a humanitarian visa for Australia. Elizabeth arrived speaking 3 languages, Polish, German and some Russian, but not a word of English. She did not know a single soul here. She was put up in the Midway Hostel in Maribyrnong, and on her 3rd day she started work in a factory, installing 3,500 screws a day into car dashboards. By her side constantly was a Polish-English dictionary. Every spare moment she had, she listened to English tapes and memorised thousands of words. Her dream was a university education, the same dream of her parents, who had been denied that opportunity because of World War II. At times, Elizabeth was full of despair at her future, but she focused that despair into a determination to master English. Finally, at the age of 28, her English was sufficiently fluent to study a humanities degree in multicultural studies. She later completed a master's in social sciences. Elizabeth says she never takes for granted a single day of her life in Australia. She never forgets the opportunity that she has been granted. Then there's Long Nguyen, who has served the veterans and Vietnamese community for many years. As president of the Footscray RSL, the Victorian branch of the Vietnamese Veterans Association and the Victorian chapter of the Vietnamese community in Australia. Long still remembers the day he landed in Australia in May 1983. surrounded by a sea of white faces. It felt like a dream, he says, after his 5 years detained in a Labor camp for serving as a Navy officer in the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces and fighting the Viet Cong. When the war ended in 1975, as a newly married man, Long was detained in a camp near the Cambodian border. Fed barely a subsistence diet, he was put to work felling forests and planting rice. Upon his release, Long started planning his family's escape and that of some other families. Because of his Navy experience, Long was made the leader. On the fateful night in December 1982, Long, his wife and 2 toddlers headed to the rendezvous point with 32 others. But when his wife and children were captured by police, Long faced an impossible choice. He remained responsible for fulfilling the dreams of the whole group, and he felt he had to proceed with the plan. After 7 days and 7 nights at sea in their 12-metre boat, the group reached Indonesia. Long spent 6 months in the UNHCR-operated Galang camp before being flown to Australia. However, while Long felt grateful for his new start and the safety of Australia, the trauma of the family separations remained. It was another 2 years before he and his family were united. Long worked for 24 years at Holden's Port Melbourne factory, and he says the family remains fiercely loyal to the Holden brand. Another deserving winner in this year's category of OAMs was Charlie Desira. For 23 years, Charlie Desira has been the driving force behind the Loaves and Fishes Food Bank, a lifeline for literally thousands of people in Melbourne's West. A 10-pound pom, Charlie left Malta at the age of 18 in 1963. After starting work in a cardboard factory, he climbed the ranks, eventually retiring from an operational role at Australia Post. Even while working full-time, Charlie always found time to volunteer, primarily with the Starlight Foundation, which supports sick children. He had also been involved with his local church, the Holy Eucharist Parish, supporting refugees, finding them places to live and delivering them food parcels. When the local priest asked Charlie if he wanted to start a food bank, he didn't hesitate. Charlie and his team of 24 volunteers spend their days picking up donated food, handing out food parcels from the St Albans Church, or delivering them direct, and constantly trying to raise money to cover their costs. He says, "I thank God that he gave me the opportunity to do this. I enjoy it." Valentina Brzezowski also was awarded. Valentina arrived in Australia as a 4-year-old with her Russian parents, who had been forced to work in German labour camps. In her teens, Valentina became involved with the Russian Orthodox Church and began decades of volunteering. She and her friends started a sports club and ran dance groups. When the Chernobyl disaster hit, she was a founding member of the Chernobyl Relief Fund, raising money and collecting supplies for family in the Ukraine. Now 70, Valentina has been volunteering for more than 5 decades. Every Easter, she and her fellow volunteers continue to make hundreds of Easter breads to distribute to their local community, because keeping alive cultural traditions remains so important. While all the award recipients are grateful that their work has been recognised, I must note that they are also all quick to point out that it was having a strong team around them that made it possible for them to achieve what they did. Gary Lee has called Melbourne home for more than 20 years after moving from Malaysia as an international student. He had been in Australia just 1 week before he nominated for a position on the RMIT Association of International Students Committee, and so began his long community involvement. Passionate about the well-being and interests of culturally and linguistically diverse communities, including international students, in 2016 Gary was awarded the New Australian of the Year award, which recognises the contributions of migrants and refugees in Australia. Samuel Parker competed in the 1960 Olympics and is Australia's most successful wrestling coach. His coaching career began in 1965, and he has trained numerous wrestlers at the highest international levels. Sam was convinced that local Australian wrestlers could win at the world level if given the proper training, and he travelled the world to garner coaching skills and provide competitive opportunities for his wrestlers. All of the people that I've just talked about won the OAM Award. Guy McCrory won the Australian Fire Service Medal. He was awarded the Australian Fire Service Medal for his long involvement with fire services. Guy joined the Metropolitan Fire Brigade in April 1986 and was promoted to Station Officer in 1991. He became a Senior Station Officer in 2003 and started in his current role as Community Safety and Emergency Management Commander in 2010. Guy has fought major fires over a very long period of time and has also worked as an incident controller at large structural fires and hazmat incidents. Gary, very meritoriously and deservedly, was awarded this year the Australian Fire Service Medal. I would like to congratulate all the recipients of these awards for all that they have done and continue to do in the Fraser community.
Thank you. I give the call to the member for Lyme.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today because we noticed in question time our Energy Minister was talking about a massive amount of capital going from the federal government into state government hands to expand the grid. And I just would like to talk a bit about this stage of the transition and what's likely. I have before me the fact sheet regarding the decommissioning of Liddell Power Station, its closure and turning it into an energy hub site. But I'd note that 1,500 megawatts will vanish April 2023 after the Easter holidays. And the last time we had even unscheduled loss of 500 megawatts there, followed by the loss at Callide Power Station because of an accident where hydrogen gas in the generator blew up. We had energy chaos and the national electricity market was suspended. Now, I can't see how that won't happen again when this plant closure happens. Our reserve margin is wafer thin, many times potentially negative, and this will precipitate blackouts in some shape or form. Not necessarily the whole grid, they will just prune supply to the edges of the grid to keep everything running. And I would like to point out that the bring forward and even the planned transition hasn't adequately planned for enough replacement reliable generation. It's really quite scary. You've only got to look at what's happened in Germany. They relied on a lot of gas and energy coming from France and other places, but gas from Russia. All of a sudden, they've opened up over 20 coal-fired power plants, which they kept in care and maintenance. In fact, the oldest station in Berlin was constructed in 1928. So the moral of the story is, I think we are mad to let Liddell be destroyed. We should put that in care and maintenance because we will need... Sorry? I know, but that is... We are meant to be the sensible ones. I know individual companies, as part of their plan, but it's part of what's keeping the modern industrial city complex called Sydney and the rest of New South Wales going, and there's not an adequate replacement. They managed to maintain all their assets, even though they've got nuclear power plants they're not opening up. They've repowered these coal plants. That's the approach we should be adopting. Again, Eraring, with 2.9 gigawatts, that's 2,900 megawatts, has had its closure brought forward and is now scheduled to close in 2025. Well, that's what they have announced. Now, a lot of people are adding up installed capacity of replacement renewable generators, planning on the mythical economic hydrogen appearing, and a solar thermal plant at Liddell. But as many people may not realise, solar thermal isn't just a solar concentrating thermal plant, it has to have a backup gas plant as well. So we are just replacing coal with perhaps gas, and on the occasions that it's nice and sunny, which on average is about 20% of the time, we'll have some replacement electricity. But as we all know, the wind and the sun are randomly variable, and you've got to disconnect from measuring the installed capacity of a solar farm or a wind farm with what is actually delivered. So installed capacity, it might be a 1,000 megawatt solar farm, but doesn't mean it produces 1,000 megawatts all the time. Some days, and every night and every evening, it produces nothing. But many people are just adding up the installed capacity and think it's a like for like. Wind capacity is a bit better at 30 to 35, depending on whether you're onshore or offshore. But there's plenty of times in Australia, there's 3 months which are the low wind months. And there's plenty, you can go to the Wind Maps data bank and you can see there are many days where for more than 17 hours, there's next to no wind. So you can have all the wind in the world, but then you can have none. In the space of 6, 12 hours, 4 hours, it can change. But again, the other issue is a lot of this renewable energy is asynchronous, and it can only be generated when it can be incorporated. So they're having to whack in these huge synchronous condensers to try and make up for the loss of those huge 150-tonne generators that are spinning at exactly 50 hertz. And it's getting increasingly complex for any of the operators to maintain that frequency, voltage and inertia control that's critical to keep the grid stable. Most people don't realise that what goes into the grid has to be matched what's going out. If there's too much, sparks fly. If the frequency goes up or down, plus or minus 1 hertz, you can find machines stop working. Now, the national electricity market wasn't always a national electricity market. Back in the day when states used to act like self-reliant institutions and built freeways and dams and roads, and they also built the modern grids, state by state. A lot of young people don't realise that. They think it's always been run by this thing called a market. That's only a construct that came in the early 90s, first in Victoria, but then it was just a market within Victoria comparing coal with coal, energy with energy. Whereas now it's a complex amalgam of environmental laws, restricted trade practices, subsidies in the form of certificates, legislative assistance with restrictions, renewable energy targets. It's not just chosen on availability and kilowatts that are delivered. There's all these other distortions. And the NEM, even though we are criticised for trying to keep the lights on for the last 9 years, the reason, and the minister says, well, why didn't you do anything about fixing this up with nuclear plants for the last 9 years? The reason is there's a ban on nuclear, which could replace these retiring power stations with synchronous, reliable energy. But what I want to really put on the record is that the federal government, even our current energy minister, doesn't control the NEM. All the board appointments are by the member states. We only get to appoint the chairman and the CEO, and it has to be agreed on by the states. Whereas everyone turns to the federal government, and this mess has been made by many authors. And at the root cause of this is that a lot of them have believed and taken as Bible what AEMO's plan for the future grid would look like, as though it is absolutely rock solid. Now, that plan is called the Integrated System Plan, and it used to be done heavily by industry with a bit of government oversight. But, the Gen Cost report that is used as part of the ISP planning used to be generated not just by academics and people in AEMO. It used to be assessed by industry players, like power utilities, like grid operators. So the Gen Cost report is a different beast from what it was 10, 15 years ago. Even from what industry people told me, in the last 10 years, it's really much more of a political document. And it's a disappointing thing that CSIRO's reputation in the eyes of many engineers has gone down, 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 because they put their moniker calling it a CSIRO authored report, where it was actually done by engineering consultants. Now, across the whole regulatory structure, there are a couple of engineers, but they are thin on the ground, and there's no deep, experienced system power engineers amongst them. And we recently had a forum in Parliament where all the most senior grid and energy experts that one could assemble came for free and had a 2-day forum. Now, these things that I've been mentioning, they're not my words. They are the assessment of people who've got hundreds of years of operating the New South Wales power grid, the Victorian power grid, who drew up the original rules for the national electricity market. These are deeply experienced engineers, and they are very worried that we are heading for blackouts. So, Madam Deputy Chair, with your background, you'd understand a lot of these things, I'm sure, but you can't fault the points that these wonderful engineers have made. We really need to get more people like them running and looking at this, because it isn't viable and it's destined to fail.
Thank you. I give the call to the member for McEwen.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Before I go into my speech tonight, I want to acknowledge the tragedy that is currently unfolding overseas in Turkey and Syria. An earthquake of 7.8 magnitude has hit heavily populated regions of Turkey and Syria, killing more than 3,700 people, with more expected casualties to be reported in the oncoming days. The stories coming out are harrowing, they're heartbreaking, and our thoughts go out to the Turkish and Syrian communities both here and overseas, as families anxiously await news from loved ones. The government has already committed $10 million in humanitarian assistance to the rescue and recovery effort, and our consulate is available at all hours to any Australian in the region that needs emergency assistance. So we extend our deepest sympathies to those in the communities affected, and rest assured, Australia is there ready to help its friend in Turkey. Also rise to talk about some of the changes that have happened in our electorate since the Albanese government came into government last year, and some of the exciting things that have come to pass in our community during the summer break. The electorate of McEwen can be proud of all the changes and new projects that have been completed in this time, as many people in the community have campaigned and worked with our office to get these projects in place. Alongside the election and re-election of some excellent state MPs, we will continue to deliver on our promise to our community and work for the people of McEwen. These actions that have been taken not only improve the livelihoods of our community, but work to tackle the scourge of rising costs of living handed to us when we took government in May. Labor delivers for our community, and we continue to do that. When it comes to infrastructure, Speaker, we're finally seeing the movement on the long-awaited and long-promised Hume Highway Watson Street Diamond interchange, now that we have strong Labor governments at both federal and state level. We can finally ensure that our roads in our electorate become better, safer and more efficient. The former Liberal government in August 2020 announced to the people of McEwen that $50 million would be given to the project, after years of outcry from the locals about how our roads weren't safe. It was a promise that the Hume Freeway between Watson Street and Wallen and the M80 Ring Road would be upgraded under the now disgraced Car Park Rorts Fund or Urban Congestion Fund. We watched, we waited, and then we waited. And we waited some more, realising that we had been sold a pup for political point scoring again from the coalition. I tried working with the then government, and to his credit, the member for Riverina was very upfront with us in trying to get it done. But all we got from Minister Tudge at the time was lip service about it being done, and the government just ignored the advocacy of the people in our communities. We then found out that another promise that was committed by the coalition, the money was taken out of that to then prop up the bodgy funding announcement that they'd made on the Watson Street interchange. But what we did get was the election of the Albanese Labor government, which committed that $50 million in our first budget. And then the re-election of the Andrews Labor government committed $130 million to the project, so finally we are making headway. The project will improve the traffic flow in and around Wallan, making our commute better, but also giving us another option to move should there be any disruption on the Northern Highway. I'm proud to be part of a government that respects and responds to our community needs and making sure that our voices are heard. We are getting the infrastructure that our growing community electorate needs. It's only Labor who will invest and deliver to local communities' infrastructure, and it's only Labor that makes our roads safer, and it's only Labor that delivers for our seat of McEwen. Deputy Speaker, when it comes to education, the second positive change that has happened within the past couple of months is the investment that Labor has put into the future of this country, our kids. And that is the investment in education that is going to deliver for the long term. We delivered on our promise for cheaper childcare. We took this promise to the election as a cost of living measure. When I talked to our local community during our campaign, it was roundly welcomed, and there was excitement about what this promise would bring. And we went ahead and in our first 6 months delivered on this promise. Something the other side didn't really know how to do when they were in government, but we went ahead and we made childcare cheaper. This directly helps over 6,500 local families, getting kids the education that is crucial for their development and readiness for primary school. The policy also gives parents the ability to re-enter the workforce and still receive the benefits of the program that allows their kids able to get an early education. We know that the key to a child's development is in early education. And so if we're easing the burden on families to allow this economic participation by both parties, the policy means that 96% of our families with children will be better off, with parts of this policy specifically targeting the close the gap requirements. It's a holistic approach of improving access to early learning and education for all Australians. This is just one of the many measures that we are taking to tackle the rising cost of living. I also want to briefly just have a quick shout out to David Williams, and the team that have just started the new Donnybrook Primary School, which had its first day last Wednesday, 120 new students. We went down there and presented Australian flags to them, and this is part of the State Labor's plan to build 100 new schools by 2026, which is supporting growing communities like ours in McEwen. And further, just to acknowledge and give my best wishes to Carol and the team at Darrell Gwyn Primary School, who start this new year after being totally devastated by the floods we had last year. They have worked tirelessly day in, day out to get that school up and running after the floods. And also a thank you to Wallan Primary School, who took the kids and students and teachers in to give them a space to continue learning, to help them, while the Department of Education and Council Services got around to rebuild the school. So, it's an exciting year for them, and let's hope that the kids have a nice, smooth 2023 for their future. But we should also shout out to all the teachers and school staff who have worked incredibly hard over the summer to make sure everything's ready and provide the best education to local students. A massive thanks goes out to them and the community for making the start of the year possible. I know the work and resilience that this community and these workers have shown will have a lasting positive impact on students who attend these wonderful schools, including Diamond Creek Primary School, where I had the pleasure of going out there with my granddaughter for her first day. Fair to say she was a bit nervous, but she was excited when she got there, and I kept telling her, be positive, this is going to be exciting. And then I felt those same hesitations on a Sunday night when I realised I'd hop on the plane and head back to Canberra. A third positive aspect I want to talk about just quickly is health. Health is the key to our electorate. It's something that we have been fighting for years. And the continuous progress within the health policy that's making medications cheaper and GPs more available to the local community. It's all part of the plan to make health services more accessible and more affordable. We know from the 1st of January, Labor's policy to reduce the price of PBS-listed medications has come into effect. So every time you fill the script, you could save up to $12.50. This all adds up and responds to the reports of people skipping life-saving medication when they fill out their scripts. It was unacceptable, so we took this policy to the election and delivered on our promise within 6 months. We worked hard to make sure our first budget delivered the financial relief in the health field. We're also working hard to fix the chronic GP shortage that's not just unique to us, it's right across this nation, that our local community is currently experiences. Because what we did was return the DPA status to Wallan. which gave our doctors the opportunity to get access to more GPs to come into these fast-growing communities. It was absolutely astounding to think that the previous government thought it was okay to take a regional community like Wallen and surrounding areas and take the DPA off them. What it meant was in areas where we've got massive growth in population, we were having less doctors. It was the wrong thing to do. And we know that our health professionals who were screaming about needing help and care, because during those coalition years we lost so many health professionals in our area, it put our system under stress. And a prime example was that we had a doctor living in Wallen who couldn't work in Wallen because she had to go and work in an area that to get the DPA assistance, which was literally 20 minutes away. You have a doctor living and raising their family in a community and they can't work there because of I'll say it was an administrative blunder by the former government that did that. Now, this is not the end of the solution. This is actually just part of the solution that we need to do to increase doctor access in our areas. But what we did was move quickly to rectify this because we knew people couldn't get access to doctors, doctors weren't taking new patients and people were missing out. By updating this DPA classification, we're able to attract more doctors from overseas to fill the gaps we currently have in the community. Our government, the Labor government, actively solves issues in communities of our problems and fights to make sure we get our fair share of what's needed. And this year, we're not going to waste another day. We're going to continue on and keep delivering the things that our communities in McEwen need and rightly deserve.
Thank you. I give the call to the member for Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The long-awaited $120 million redevelopment of the Ocean Reef Marina is the largest infrastructure project currently in progress within the Moore electorate, which, when complete, is estimated to generate $3 billion worth of gross development value for our local economy. However, this visionary project has an opportunity cost, the loss of reefs. In contributing to this grievance debate, I wish to place on the parliamentary record the concerns of the strong local surfing community made up of people of all ages at the loss of 3 popular surf breaks due to the civil construction works for the marina. In particular, the local surfing community is extremely disappointed by the sudden announcement by the State Minister for Lands, John Carey, that advertised plans to build an artificial surf-specific reef to replace the surf breaks is to be removed from the scope of works for the project. On behalf of the local surfing community, I would like to initiate a plan to ensure that all levels of government work together to ensure that this project has progressed over a revised time frame and not forgotten. Construction of the marina redevelopment has resulted in 3 existing surf breaks at Mozzies, Big Rock and Pylons being lost. The last remaining beach break is only surfable during 4 months of the year through winter due to sand movement and the sandbank shape. This means that surfers have to travel outside of the Moore electorate to access other surf breaks. I have been contacted by a number of local residents, including Clint Bryan, James Breed, Ben Allen, Steve Blackwood, Michelle Ellis and Craig Lawson, who have all strongly advocated for an artificial reef to be installed south of the Ocean Reef Marina to restore the surfing breaks. Many other local residents and surfers in the northern suburbs have also contacted me through social media. There is a strong level of community support from groups including the Mullaloo Board Riders Club Incorporated, which has more than 100 members, and the Ocean Reef Artificial Reef Group. The group has collected 2,621 signatures on an online petition in support of the construction of an artificial reef to offset the loss of the 3 surfing breaks. The group organised a protest paddle with over 100 participants in response to the cancellation of the initial plans to build the artificial reef. When the Marina Concept Plan was advertised for public consultation in 2009, it included an artificial surfing reef, but this plan has since been removed because of the potential costs, which are estimated to be in the order of $7 million. Instead, the artificial reef has been listed as a potential future amenity. According to a statement by the State Minister for Lands, the artificial reef is deemed unfeasible and that Development WA has employed a team of coastal engineering experts to investigate the potential for the artificial surf break and found it to be unsafe. It is claimed that the advice which the government received is due to a number of factors, including swell direction, the topography of the area, and public safety concerns. An artificial surf break is not considered feasible within the development area. However, the surfing community proponents contend that these safety concerns only relate to constructing a break at the northern wall of the project and not at the preferred location at the midpoint of the development area between Mullaloo Point and the southern wall of the marina. It is expected that as a result of prediction ocean currents, a significant body of sand will start to build up between Mullaloo Point and Ocean Reef Marina over the next 10 years or so, creating a new beach. This presents an opportunity at this location to investigate a surf break. Mullaloo Point is arguably the most popular surf beach in the city of Joondalup, and a reef break directly to the north of that would increase the capacity of recreational surfing. Shallow sandbanks pose a potential hazard and danger to surfers. Mullaloo Beach features prime examples of shallow sandbanks, which have caused several injuries to local surfers. A reef break, by contrast, creates wave breaks in a more consistent manner at a consistent depth, creating a safer environment for surfers in comparison to shallow sand breaks. Since construction of the Ocean Reef Marina has begun, there have been a large increase in congestion at Mullaloo Beach, all the way from Corella Street up to Key West, particularly over summer. This congestion comes in the form of overflowing car parks, queues at the showers and toilets, and overcrowding of surfers in the water. The City of Joondalup has commissioned a report on options to develop a concept for surfing and fishing reef between Mullaloo Point and the newly constructed southern breakwater at the Ocean Reef Marina. Any future discussions outside of the Ocean Reef development area would need to be undertaken in consultation with the community, stakeholders, and all levels of government. The Mullaloo Board Riders Club has been in contact with local schools, including Mullaloo Beach Primary School and the Ocean Reef Senior High School, which support the installation of an artificial surf-specific reef. Ocean Reef High School runs a dedicated surfing program and has previously held classes at the reef breaks that have now been removed. The loss of the 3 surf breaks has resulted in the inability for the club to hold surfing contests as frequently. Last year, there was only 1 surfing contest at Mullaloo Beach due to the lack of wave shape, making the conditions non-contestable. The club was forced to hold its other 2 contests at Lancelin Back Beach, requiring members to have to travel for over an hour north. A new artificial surfing reef would allow competitions to be held with more consistently shaped waves at our local beach and at the marina. National statistics indicate that 10% of Australians surf as a pastime. This equates to 16,000 potential surfers in our local community, based on the current population of the City of Joondalup of approximately 160,000 residents. Surfing WA conducts surfing lessons at Mullaloo in winter each year, which has seen an increase in participation by 20 to 30 surfers per lesson. With an artificial reef, these increases in surfers can be spread out across multiple breaks, improving the accessibility for beginners and surfers to enter the sport. The inclusion of a surf-specific artificial reef would benefit our community by boosting participation in the sport. Surfing has a variety of mental health benefits, encouraging people to embrace the outdoor lifestyle. Local government alone would not be expected to build the artificial reef, nor would the state government be likely to initiate the project. However, there is scope for all three levels of government, local, state and federal, to work together to jointly fund the project. At a cost of at least $7 million, this represents a large project which must be listed for consideration along other competing community projects in the current difficult economic climate. It will take several years of dedicated effort for the project to materialise. Our local surfing community deserves this amenity to be restored. The construction of an artificial surf-specific reef must be placed on the capital works agenda, with steady progress made to achieve it over the next decade. I call upon all levels of government, local, state and federal, to work together with the surfing community to remedy the situation by installing an artificial surf-specific reef at the midpoint of the development area between Mullaloo Point and the southern wall of the Ocean Reef Marina. Our community deserves a plan outlining how this very worthy project will be progressed and delivered in the future. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Thank you. The time for the grievance debate has expired. The debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 192B. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made the order of the day for the next sitting. I call on the member for Hunter.
I move the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
And I call on the member for Bass.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Oh, the question is that the motion be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. I think the ayes have it. Thank you.